Welcome to the Gen Z Stoic Podcast,
where every week we strive to lead younger generations on a path to virtue through the insight of Stoic teachings and personal stories from our lives as Gen Z Stoics. Welcome to this week's episode of the Gen Z Stoic Podcast. I am your co-host, Ren.
And I am your co-host, Mateo, and today we are very excited to welcome Ryan Quirk to the podcast. Ryan is a life coach, motivational speaker, and the author of an 18-year-old's guide to self-mastery, how to master your life from the inside out. Ryan, welcome to the Gen Z Stoic Podcast, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
So Ryan, tell us a little bit about your background, your personal story, how you came to be, a life coach, motivational speaker, and author. Tell us everything.
Yeah, so it's not very stereotypical for an 18-year-old to write a book. I certainly got a lot of questions about that in the book writing process, but it was kind of just because of what I went through, right? So, like a lot of Gen Z in my younger years, I was struggling a lot with my mental health, my physical health. And it kind of came out of nowhere too, right? I think a lot of us have this experience, especially as members of Gen Z, where, we're happy and doing well in childhood, and then out of nowhere, we start to come up through the school systems, through societal structures, and into this kind of culture where it's normal to be constantly stressed out, worried, depressed, anxious. And that's exactly what happened to me. When I was about 14 years old, I started dealing with daily panic attacks, and very intense ones at that too. Having that feeling that a lot of, I'm sure, listeners can relate to, of not wanting to get out of bed in the morning, feeling intense social anxiety, feeling lost and confused in my life. In fact, I remember one experience very vividly where I was experiencing anxiety that was so bad that I hadn't eaten in the past 36 hours. My body would not leave fight or flight, and anytime I would try to eat, I would just kind of I wouldn't be able to digest any food because I was in such a state of high anxiety. And when I would reach out to those around me in my life, other adults and people like that, they were like, "Oh, it's normal. You're just stressed. You're a high schooler. This is how it's just supposed to be, right? Like, you got homework, you got tests and quizzes and exams, and this is just how it's supposed to be." And I noticed a lot of other stuff too, and was dealing with other stuff that a lot of kids deal with, like struggling in school, grade slipping. And I found myself kind of constantly in this state of confusion, but also in this state of questioning. And I'm sure you guys can relate to that, which is I was in this state where I was like, does this really have to be the norm? Everyone else around me is saying that, these are normal experiences, but I was like, really? Is this what it's actually supposed to be like? And it was that questioning that, after kind of years of dealing with this inner turmoil, my mind just racing in all these places and constantly feeling depressed and anxious and insecure in my own skin, I started to question. I said, and it kind of came to one day, and this is really how my journey begins, the self-mastery journey, where again, I was dealing with a panic attack so bad. I was sitting on the top floor of my home in this little attic space. I was on this old, worn out couch, and I was clutching my knees to my chest, and I finally just kind of said, "I'm done. There's no way that I can keep going like this. This is not the norm." I'd been trying therapy, trying medication, and nothing was really seeming to work. I was fed up. I was really fed up, and it was kind of one of those turning moments where I realized that I had to forge a new way for myself, right? I had been meeting with a psychologist who had gone to Harvard, and I'm sure he was very well intending and wanted to help me out and stuff like that. But the medication I was taking, the therapy, the talk therapy, nothing was really working, and my state just kept getting worse. And so that was when that turning moment came. I was clutching my knees to my chest. My hand was over my stomach. I was feeling it knot and throb, and I looked to the right of me, and on this little windowsill I saw an empty journal, and I don't know why it was sitting there. It's one of those kind of synchronistic moments where, like, you don't even know how it's sitting there. And I just opened up the journal, and on the top page I just wrote down, "I need help." And I started writing and writing and trying to get to the bottom of what it was I was going through and how I could find a new way. And that was a really scary feeling that I think a lot of Gen Z kids kind of go through, which is they might be trying therapy, or they might be trying medication, or they might just be handling it themselves. But this feeling of nothing's working, is there something that's just wrong with me? Because that's what I was thinking at first, which is, if the therapy and the medication isn't working, must there just be something wrong with me? Am I just incurable from this state? And so I was writing about this and journaling it all down. And somewhere in my writing, I started to feel a little bit of relief, right? And this was relentless anxiety I was going through. But somewhere in that process, I kind of just glanced up and read over the words. I remember this so clearly in my journal. I read over the words self mastery. And so that started my journey. I was about 15 years old at that time. And so now I'm 19, and for the past 4 years, I have just been relentlessly studying everything that I can, researching everything I can about philosophy, spirituality, neuroscience, and really trying to learn a new way, right? I always love this quote from Albert Einstein. He says, "The definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result." And that's what we've been doing as a society, especially with young people, is trying the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, and it's not working. You know, the rates of anxiety and depression amongst people in Gen Z, feelings of loneliness and social anxiety and feeling lost in life, it's through the roof. It's ridiculous. And so I had to look to take a new path, an unknown path for myself. And that's what I started to do. I started to learn everything I could. I was starting from ground zero, and I was reading all types of different books, trying to find the golden thread. And what I started to find is, you know, as I was reading a few books from, you know, spirituality and those spiritual ideas, a few books from philosophers and Stoic ideas, right? And then a few books from other scientists and other types of people, I started to kind of find golden threads that were connecting a lot of these core ideas. Some of these core ideas that we hear in Stoicism, right? Which is the first quote in my book is from Marcus Aurelius, where he says, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." And I started to see that popping up in all these different ways. And so my journey has been an ongoing one, and I would say that it's one that I'm still on to this day, which is every single day I'm still applying the principles and the tools, but really it all came back to those two words that I read over when I was 15 years old, sitting in that position on the top floor of my home, which is self-mastery. Whatever that I must master to get out of this state must be within me. It's not in the outside world. It doesn't lie in more money, a new relationship, a new job. It's not coming from out there. I gotta get what's in here right. And it was that kind of idea that set me on my path. And what I started to notice is as I started to apply these ideas, apply these tools, put them into practice, you know, that kind of phase of trial and error, learning, seeing which things are working and what things are not working, I started to notice something very profound. A shift started to occur within me, which is I didn't just start to feel okay and heal from my panic attacks and that really intense anxiety. I started to feel incredible. I started to feel amazing. I woke up every day with a sense of purpose, like I was on this new mission, this new journey, that every day was a new chance to learn and to grow. And it gets to the point now where even to this day, I still wake up that way. And again, like I said, I'm still growing, I'm still applying these principles myself, because this is an ongoing journey, not just with one end destination, but it's a journey that I like to call a journey of joy, which is it just keeps getting better and better. And what I realized then was if I could go from these absolutely hopeless states of intense anxiety and depression to not just getting by, but to feeling extraordinary, to feeling incredible, to feeling outstanding, could I help other people do the same? And that's what led me to write this book at 18 years old, where in 225 pages, I summarize what was probably about 30 to 40 or even 50 books that I read, hours and hours of podcasts and lectures, and I try to give people the key ideas that absolutely and radically changed my life. So that's just kind of my journey there about why I wrote the book and why I sincerely believe that it can really help anyone change from any state that they find themselves in.
Yeah, well, Ryan, I think we when we both discovered the work you were doing and we checked out your website, the thing that struck both of us was just how similar your journey is to ours, where we started out in that same dark place, and for us it was stoicism. For me specifically, it's funny you mentioned just like that higher power or whatever you want to call it. That journal was just there, right? For me, it was I went to the library and I saw meditations on the spine of a book, and it just like stood out to me. I don't know why, some higher power, whatever you want to call it, just directed my eyes directly to that book, and I picked it up and I was like, wow, this is a roadmap to make me feel better. And it's not. I like that you bring up, like, it's not just like a one-stop solution, whether it's just philosophy or neuroscience. Like, you have to combine those to find that golden thread, right?
Yes.
And so you doing that, I think, is just really cool how closely it mirrors our journey, and it speaks to the fact that there are a lot of people who are going through what we're going through, and society's response to that is either, oh, it's normal, like you said, or, oh, you just need to tough it out, stop being so soft. It's kind of like that generational gap thing where they're like, oh, you don't have it as bad as we did, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, whatever. But we equally had it as bad. It's not a competition. We're just going through different issues in Gen Z, right? And so sweeping that problem under the rug, saying, oh, you're soft, or, oh, it's normal, it's not a solution. And the advice we've always had when we talk about mental health on this podcast is, if there isn't a solution out there for you, don't feel bad about it. Don't feel like it's a reflection of you. Go out and find a new solution. And it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing. And so it's really inspirational to hear about that. And I was just kind of curious, we talk about Gen Z representation and how these generations are telling us it's normal. Talk therapy maybe doesn't work for our generation, in large part, or medication. And there's a lot of these solutions that have been around for a long time, but the issue has gotten worse. So in your experience, how important is that representation, especially, going through that process yourself? And I'm assuming the Harvard therapist was not 18, 19. So
Yeah, no, it's incredibly important, that representation, because I think we see older generations kind of making fun of Gen Z. They say that we're soft, or that we're not as good as these prior generations, or that we have it worse. But what I've found is that a lot of Gen Zers, if that's the right word, is a lot of Gen Zers actually are really wonderful, wonderful people. I mean, I'm a Gen Zer myself, but what I do notice is that our generation tends to struggle quite a lot, and that a lot of people are looking for solutions, but feeling utterly lost because prior generations are not providing those solutions. And that's one of the main issues that we've run into. Again, one kind of story that I remember is, I was meeting with this Harvard psychologist for, it was like 20 or 25 sessions at the time. And it felt like I was just getting worse and worse. I was going in and all we were doing is talking about my problems. It wasn't like we were talking about actual ideas that I could apply or integrate to come to solutions. And it was like every single time we were just talking about my problems. And I remember I was at the gym and I was on the verge of having a panic attack. And one man came up to me and he just said, "Hey man, you look great. You want to get some water?" And I was like, excuse me? Like, I was literally on the verge of having this intense panic attack, and I immediately started to feel better. And he didn't give me any therapeutic advice or anything, but all we did is have a conversation. But looking back, what it made me realize is that, one moment of true compassion from another human being helped me more than 20 sessions with a Harvard psychologist. That was what really flipped my paradigm, which is, I provide a lot of tools and stuff like that are very helpful, but the current system needs an update. It needs to be upgraded, because more and more Gen Zers are struggling throughout their lives and every single day, and that we need to find new and improved solutions for our generation. And it's exactly like you said, it's not a competition of which generation had it worse. It's, let's come together to make things better. That's really what it is.
Ryan, there's a few things you said that really stood out to me. And the first thing is, when you started feeling better and you were waking up with this spark. There's a quote from Marcus Aurelius where he says, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love." And that, I couldn't help but think about that quote, because it seemed, like you were describing, every time you woke up, you were happy, you were grateful. You were grateful to be where you were. You were happy to be feeling the things you were feeling. And you mentioned earlier as well, and like Ren was mentioning with talk therapy, we talked about psychology and how you're very passionate about reforming psychology and the way that psychologists, analyze the youth especially, and try to find these patterns in their minds and help, with therapy, talk therapy. It could be all kinds of, mental therapy to help our generation. So one thing I'm curious about is conditioning, right? Conditioning is a very reoccurring term in psychology. And now with Stoicism and conditioning, how can we condition our generation to sort of change our minds from being, very negative and very sad, being stuck under this rock in a hard place? What can Stoicism how can Stoicism play in the role of psychology and reconditioning our minds to sort of having a better outlook on life?
Yeah, well, I first of all, I love Stoicism. Although my work touches on many different philosophies, Stoicism is one of the kind of key ones that I hone in on. And one of the main things that I learned is that the process is, you could call it reconditioning, but what I would actually say is it's more about letting go of old conditioning. And I think that's what the Stoics touch on too, which is it's this idea of disidentifying with our thoughts and our negative belief systems and things that we might have picked up along the way. And just for anyone who's listening, this is a really powerful idea that they can apply or try, which immediately started to help me in my journey, which is the next time you feel yourself like feeling a little anxious, instead of saying, oh no, why am I so anxious? Say, look at that, anxiety has attached itself to me. Creating this distinction between the anxiety, between the depression, and you, right? So even if you've been depressed for 2 years, you say, wow, look at that. Depression has attached itself to me for 2 years. In the same way, if you get a thorn stuck in your arm, you don't say, I am the thorn. You say, oh, look, there's a thorn. And you pluck it out and then you chuck it away. And I think that's something that Stoicism really provided me, which is it's not that you need to seek or find or create happiness. It's that in essence, your natural state is that spark state. It's that state of being excited every morning. It's that state of, feeling purposeful and alive. And that it's really a more of a process of letting go and letting go of what is not you, that old prior conditioning, and letting in your natural state, which is, as I kind of discuss with anyone that I talk to, and what I've found in my own life is a state of joy. It's a state of confidence. It's a state of authenticity. And as you said, which is so powerful, deep appreciation and gratitude for being alive.
We go throughout life and we look towards these external sources for teaching us how to be happy or how to feel a certain way when that is inherently in us the entire time. We're not born like humans are not born and just come out of the womb and oh, we're depressed. Like that's not how life works. You come out and things hit you and you react to them. And that's the core tenet of Stoicism is it's all about the reaction, right?
Yeah, so it's actually funny when I was learning about this idea of, what causes depression, what I found out is that human beings are actually only born with two biologically wired fears, which is I believe it's the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. That means that every other fear or anxiety or depressing experience that you go through in your life is something that was accidentally, it's not your fault, picked up, and you have the power to put it down. And, we talk about our natural state being joy. That's why when babies come out, we call them little bundles of joy, right? Which is unless they're cold or too hot or upset or anything, they'll cry for their parents. But when they're in their natural state, once all their survival needs are met, they're just little bundles of joy. They're just playing with their toes. They're happy to be alive. They're just incredibly excited. And that's our natural state too. And that's what I want to help people get back to. And that's why I love the work that you guys do as well, is because I think Stoicism offers so many powerful insights, and the work that you guys do offers so many powerful insights to help people get back to see and experience directly that their natural state is joy. But anyways, I cut you off there. You can continue going on.
No, go ahead. That's a beautiful point to be made, right? Like the terminology is everything in that. Like they truly are bundles of joy, and I think it'd be kind of silly to call an 18-year-old a bundle of joy. But I think if we can
Yeah.
continue that state all the way through life, then whether you strip away all your possessions or you're this rich wealthy man or you're living on a couch or you whatever your state is, you still maintain that bundle of joy because it starts within you and you keep that sense. So reciprocating that, very impressed by the work you're doing. It's very important. On that note, right, your book, Self Mastery from an 18-year-old's perspective, something that people are going to look at and say, well, he's an 18-year-old. He doesn't have that life experience yet. But, just hearing you for 20 minutes now, like you're obviously very well researched. You've read these books, you've done these lectures, and it's still a journey, but you have a lot to share. So if we could just kind of maybe start with like a brief overview of your book and your strategies before we kind of tackle and dive deep into it.
Yeah. Yeah. So the quick thing I'll say is just on that last point before I dive into that is that there's one other analogy that I love using for people when talking to them about this idea that joy is their natural state, which is I tell them to imagine like a river that's running, right? And you don't have to make the river run. It's already moving and flowing. And the only thing that stops it is when you take a giant boulder and you place it down or you build a dam, right? And so in that same way, people need to understand that within them right now, no matter how depressed or anxious they've been feeling, is a river of well-being, as I call it. It's a river of peace, it's a river of happiness, it's a river of joy. And all you have to do is remove those boulders, which in this sense, as the Stoics might call it, this conditioning, that this negative conditioning, these negative thoughts and negative identifications. But anyways, you asked me about what I came to as the kind of pillars of the book, the pillars of self-mastery, right? And so the whole premise of self-mastery is not a new one, but it's one that is based on this fundamental principle that in order to change your life, you have to change. That if you are unhappy while you're broke, but you're deeply unhappy, you're not going to be any more like you're not going to be exuberantly happy when you have millions of dollars, right? If you're feeling deeply lonely outside of a relationship, what most people come to find, and this again, this is just experiential truth, they find themselves in a relationship and they're still feeling lonely and isolated. It's this separation between our inner worlds and the outer world. And that's what the Stoics were deeply interested in, is the power of our inner worlds, our inner environment, right? Especially as Marcus Aurelius taught, controlling that which is in our control and letting go of that which is not in our control. And so the four pillars of self-mastery are what I kind of describe as the four pillars that are totally in our control, and that if we choose to develop them and master them, that joy is inevitable. It just happens naturally. And those four pillars are mental mastery, emotional mastery, physical mastery, and then what I call spiritual mastery. Although spiritual mastery could also be kind of called life mastery, because again, it's not subject to being connected to one spiritual idea or anything. It's how you are relating with life. And the reason that those four pillars are so important is because they're the only four pillars that you have total freedom over. Like, you don't get to entirely decide who gets elected in office. You don't get to decide what the traffic situation is like on your way to work. But your thoughts, your emotions, the actions that you take, these are things totally in your control. And so they're absolutely worth mastering. And when the Stoics talk a lot about trying, how much energy and time we waste trying to control things outside of our control, right? And what I found is that through mastery over those four pillars and development of those four pillars of our inner environment and of ourselves, that joy, success, confidence, these things just become inevitable.
Well, I actually have something to ask because I was reading about the description of your book,
Yeah.
about the four pillars, and you were saying, well, one, okay, about the whole control thing. Ren will talk your ear off about the dichotomy of control because it's a very important aspect in Stoicism that is kind of a fundamental, it's kind of the core of why letting go is actually very easy, is because it's simply between what you can and what you can't control. But not to go off on a tangent, you were talking about all these choices and all these actions that you can make. In the description of your book, it says every choice we make in life ultimately is a choice between fear and love. And so I'm interested, as you sort of go into these four pillars, can you talk about how like the choice between fear and love is present? I'm curious about what you mean by that.
Yeah. So what we find is that everything that we fundamentally seek in life is what I call a state of being, which is you have thoughts and you have emotions and you have a mind and you have a heart, and they're within you, right? Ren, I can't reach into your mind and make you think a certain thought. That is your freedom and your free will to choose what it is you think and how it is you cultivate and create your inner landscape. And so, this idea of your inner world being so powerful, it's kind of like, imagine if you had sunglasses. And you know how when you put on those sunglasses that are tinted blue, everything in the world appears blue? Or if they're like a little bit tinted, everything appears a little tinted. So you get to choose how it is you view the world, which is, if you're having negative, confusing thoughts and negative, confusing emotions, your whole life, every aspect of your life looks negative and confusing. If you're having calm, creative, uplifting thoughts, and your emotions are joy and love and excitement and peace, your life is joyful, loving, exciting, and peaceful. But what I talk about is, this idea between fear and love is that these states of consciousness, or these states of being, these inner states, they exist on a spectrum, right? So you have fear on one end and you have love on the other end, just like you have hot and cold. You have, we could say, sadness and happiness. You have insecurity and confidence, right? And so that the idea then is that just as again, Mateo, I can't go into your mind and force you to think certain thoughts or anything. That is totally in your control. We need to empower each individual with the right understanding to be able to create their inner landscape the way that they want, which ultimately becomes a choice between fear and love. I can use many other adjectives, but those are the primary two states where human beings are either in a state of seeking well-being or expressing well-being, which is they're either looking for something to feel that love, that sense of peace and happiness, or they're expressing that. They're peaceful, happy, and now they're giving it to other people. They're expressing it through their creative ideas, and so on and so forth. And that's what the choice really comes down to. That's what it really becomes about. And what I try to tell people too is it's not their fault if they find themselves in states of fear, because we live in a society where you were taught more about advanced algebra and how tall King Tut was before you were taught how to understand the most basic function of your thoughts and emotions. There's one teacher that I love listening to. His name is Sadhguru, and he's an Indian teacher. And he says, the human mechanism of your mind and your emotions and your body, all these complicated systems, is the most complex machine on the entire planet. And you've never been given a user's manual. And I think that's what Stoicism provides as well, which is a type of manual for saying, hey, like, this is life and like here's how you are able to operate in it, and that you get the foundations out of the way first, how you can manage your inner environment, how you can master yourself, and then go out into the world, then express your creative ideas, then uplift other people and do wonderful things and find all the success and achievements and go down the path that you want to follow, right? And so that's what that idea is between fear and love, which is it's totally your free will. And that's what's so beautiful about it too, which is if I force you and I say, I'm forcing you, Ren, to be loving, it's not really true love, right? You're being forced upon it. So it's the fact that you have total freedom to choose, especially when given the right understanding and the right wisdom. Do I want to live in a happy, loving state, or do I not? And that's totally your choice. And it's such a beautiful freedom that we've been given. And I want to help empower people to make that choice for themselves, that choice between fear and love.
Well, it's self-mastery, right? Self-mastery. Nobody knows how you're going to master yourself other than you. You know when you get to that point. You know when you are happy. You know when you are feeling true love. Nobody else can they can tell you, these are some strategies to do it, which is exactly what like Stoicism does and your book does, but you don't know until you feel that and you experience that. And so, relying on other people to tell you like, all right, well, this is how you're supposed to think, so think this way. No, man, that's not how that works. And
Yep.
I really love that you bring up the academic aspect because, especially as it relates to philosophy, when it comes to philosophy, it seems like it's an academic study, which is not what the original intention of philosophy was, right? Philosophy was the pursuit of knowledge in order to live a better life. But now, especially in America, it's kind of gatekeeped at the collegiate level where you have like these PhD professors who can teach it to you, but it's not instilled when you're 14 and you're just encountering what the real world is. They're teaching you like, this is algebra, this is calculus. I wish they taught us how to do taxes, but they don't teach us how to do taxes. There's no topic of like well-being. The first time I heard well-being in a classroom was actually my first semester this year in college. That was the first time I ever heard the term well-being being brought up in a classroom setting. So no wonder then if we're taught all of these kind of, I guess, academic things, but we're not taught how can we apply them but still feel fulfilled. So in our careers, no matter what happens to us, we still have that kind of state of happiness. No wonder that we all are walking through life kind of lost, right? Because we have no guidance whatsoever. And so it's really important to highlight all of these resources really are free, right? Like you can go to a public library, you can pick up a philosophy book. I'm sure in your experience, a lot of those resources were very easy to come by. You just weren't aware with them until you sought them out. And so that's what the important aspect is of seeking them out. And that's why I'm so glad we have you on here today is even in my personal life, as soon as you offered us some free copies of the book, I just spread them to my friends and they were all like, wow, this is amazing. Like somebody has this perspective. Like, let's check this out. I had no idea this existed. And so it's that kind of aspect, right, of let's make this just awareness, right? You don't have to agree with 100% of what I'm saying, but at least be aware of the fact that self-mastery exists and there's hundreds, thousands of resources out there that you can analyze yourself and then apply.
Yes, and that's exactly what it is too. One of the first things I say in the book is take only what resonates with your heart, right? Which is the right teachings. There's not just one exact path. It's take what resonates with you, but understand some of the core fundamental ideas, which is that, happiness can be your natural state of being. Whatever state you find yourself in, if it's, daily panic attacks like I was in, or a deep state of depression, there is healing available to you, right? So that there's kind of these core underlying threads or principles throughout all of these different amazing teachings in Stoicism and in other spiritual traditions, and in more modern neuroscience and these kind of other discoveries, right? But your path is unique, and just to understand that you are empowered, right? One of the other things I say is the first thing a master will tell you is that you too are a master, right? And a master's never going to say, I'm above you. It's going to say, I have access to all the same things that you have access to, and I'd simply like to help you on your journey, right? And so that's what it's really about. And that's, when we talk about, a lot of people talk about this idea of creating a better world, right? Where we're pursuing space innovation and all these new technologies, which is wonderful and beautiful and amazing. And this idea of trying to create a more harmonious, peaceful, loving world, right? Because every time we turn on the news, we're seeing war and violence displayed to us. And one of the things too is it brings me back. I love that quote so much. Trying the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, is the definition of insanity. And one of the things I touch on and I try to tell people is that world peace starts within. When you decide to find peace within yourself, you are casting your vote for peace for other people too, for a more loving world. When you find love and creativity within yourself, you're casting your vote for a more loving and creative world. It starts within you, right? Because if we live in a society where people are afraid and scared and anxious, they're going to act from that state of fear and anxiety. But if we live in a society where people are naturally feeling peaceful and loving, you don't have to teach people how to be kind. Like Matteo, if you right now were feeling a sense of tremendous well-being and peace and love, do I have to tell you to not be mean to Ren, or are you going to be nice to him? You know,
Depends on the day, but
depends. Yeah, it depends on the day. Yeah, but yeah, in general, I mean that's what it is too. Which is, if you're feeling loving and peaceful, no one has to teach you how to be kind. You walk by a stranger and you smile at them and you hope to uplift them, right? But on the flip side of that, if you're feeling angry and upset and you feel like you can't control your inner environment, then how easy is it to lash out at even a loved one? Like, how many times have you felt intensely angry and said something you really don't mean to someone you care about? So, the key to a more peaceful world is cultivating more peaceful individuals. And that starts with each person finding their own level of self mastery, finding their own self empowerment, and having them understand that they don't have to do it alone, but that they are self empowered. And that's the paradox, too, which is you have guidance, you have support, you have resources, but that you also hold this tremendous power and ability to do this for yourself. I mean, if I can go from a state of daily panic attacks to daily joy, like waking up, I don't know, this is one of the first things I do when I wake up is I open my eyes, I take a deep breath, and I say, I'm back, and I'm ready, and I'm excited for the day. If I can go from daily panic attacks where I'm literally unable to eat because I'm in so much anxiety to that state of being, anyone can do it, and they just need the right understanding. And that's why your guys' podcast is amazing, and I'm such a huge fan of it. So,
Well, first, we, as much as you're a fan of us, like the reason you're here is because we are equally as a fan of, the work that you're doing. We see the value that it's providing. We believe that, the value that you're giving, the value that we're giving can quite literally change the entire face of an entire generation. I mean, that's sort of why we're doing this, is because our generation is, we hear a lot of, this conspiracy world ending stuff, but it's like, we're the last generation. We're like the make or break generation. And if you really think about it, I mean, that's sort of true, because we are in transition. Gen Z is in the middle of probably one of the biggest digital revolutions, or just revolutions of all time, the change of a society. Everything we do, we are in the middle of that big transition. But about your mind and self-discipline, the thing that you have in common that we all talk about in Stoicism, we've talked about this with previous guests, is all about how it all starts from within. You can seek as many external, help centers or therapists or advice, but at the end of the day, and this is where you realize, this is where your turning point was, where you realized it was within you. And Marcus Aurelius talks about switching your mindset. And the best quote I can find is, stop allowing your mind to be a slave, to be jerked about by selfish impulses, to kick against fate and the present, and to mistrust the future. You brought up anxiety a lot. Well, mistrusting the future is sort of the sole component to anxiety, is where we don't trust what tomorrow is going to bring. And also, right, kicking against fate and the present is worrying about what's going to happen now. The only way that we can really control what is in the now is through our own action. And that's the one thing we can't control, and the only thing we really should be focused on. There's a weird balance that you sort of have to find with Stoicism, right? Is between self-mastery and community. And it's very easy to get too pulled too much to one side. If you're too focused on self-mastery, you neglect the people around you. And if you're too focused on putting other people before you, you're going to completely neglect yourself. So I want your opinion on this. There are two ways that you could look at this. One, the best way to love yourself is to love others. But people would also say the only way to love others is to first start by loving yourself. I think both could be true. So I want to hear what you have to say on this.
Yeah, what I would say is it's a two-way street, which is it isn't it's like what came first, the chicken or the egg? It's like they both give rise to each other, which is, you know, if you can only really love someone else to the degree which you're feeling love within yourself. You can only help someone else out of a negative situation to the degree that you're positive, but part of that process of helping yourself out is also the desire to help other people out at the same time. And that's why self-mastery is and actually choosing to value your own happiness, choosing to value your own well-being is actually one of the most selfless things you could ever do. There's a beautiful quote from a spiritual teacher, Ramana Maharshi, where he says, "Your own self-realization is the greatest gift that you render to the world." Because if you're feeling happy and uplifted, first of all, the only thing you want to do is help other people feel that way when you're really feeling it yourself. And you also positively impact other people without even knowing it. You know, if you guys have ever had the experience of walking into a room with someone and they're just absolutely ecstatic, you're not even talking to them, they're not even noticing you, but you can just tell they're radiating this positive energy. They're feeling happy, they're feeling alive, and when you're around them, you get this sense that everything's okay. Or vice versa, you walk into a room with someone and you can really tell that they're feeling down immediately. You don't even have to talk to them, you just feel it kind of coming off of them. So what it really is it's a two-way street. It's, you know, to prioritize your own self-mastery is one of the greatest things that you can do for other people, right? Because then you have the experience from your own journey to aid and assist and uplift other people. And it goes back to that other thing too, which is you're always expressing the state of being that you're in, which is if you're in a state of negativity, it's so easy to lash out at other people. This is why, so much of society, we separate ourselves by race, religion, gender, and all these other things. It's because when we feel, one of the things I talk about in the book, and this is just so powerful, is we often think that hate is the opposite of love. When in actuality, fear is the opposite of love, and what we call hate is fear in action. Because when we're afraid, we take the most actions of hate towards other people. So if I'm afraid of you because you look different, or you think different, or you talk different, then I'm going to be hateful and afraid of you. But if I'm feeling love, I'm honoring your unique differences. I'm learning from them, right? And so that's what we have to do. If we want to remove hate within the world, we have to help each individual learn to move from fear into love, to stop being afraid, because it's only when we're afraid that we take actions of hatred towards our fellow brothers and sisters of the human race, right? And so I'll leave it at there for now. I don't know, Ren, maybe you want to jump in with any
Yeah.
comments there.
No, it's actually interesting. That was something I discovered a few years ago in terms of like hate is born out of fear. And if you look at
Yes.
like terms like homophobic, transphobic, that's a phobia, which definitionally is fear, right?
Fear, yes.
So if you just think about simply like the vocab behind it, it becomes very clear. And I love that you say it's a two-way street, because when I am with my friends and I can tell, like maybe he didn't get enough sleep last night or something and he's not in a good headspace, my advice is not like, how do you feel, like, what's wrong? It's, have you done something nice for somebody today? Go do it. Because that's like,
Yes.
to me, that's like the quickest way to snap out of it, right? Because even if, like the three of us, we've learned quite a lot about ourselves, but we're not perfect. So there are going to be days where, something happens, we fail a test or something, and we're like, damn, man, like today sucks. Like, but the way you snap out of that headspace, at least to me, is doing something nice for somebody else. And so it's really beautiful that you say that, because, Stoicism gets this bad rap as a very apathetic school of philosophy where, we only care about ourselves, and things that don't affect us, or we think don't affect us, we don't care about. But that's not true. It's actually the opposite of what Stoicism is about. Seneca says that men learn as they teach, right? So
Yes.
when we discover these important aspects of ourselves, the thing we want to do is we want to go out and scream from the rooftops like, "Hey, I found this out. Why doesn't everybody feel this way? This is such a great feeling to experience." And,
Yes.
and so like I'll keep saying it's so cool, but everything you say, like in my mind, I'm like, man, I feel exactly the same way. Like I feel this every day. We are on the same wavelength here. So it's just something truly inspiring. And it's kind of counterintuitive, right? Like, if you're feeling terrible, you think you might want to treat yourself, but treating others is the quicker route to recovering from that state you're in and returning back to balance, returning back to happiness and joy, because you're seeing it in other people. And so you're inspired and you're like, well, if I can, cause that around me, then obviously I should be feeling this way.
And
Yeah.
I want to add to that real quick before you is Ryan has you taken a different approach. You started at a different spot, and Ren started at a different spot, and I started at a different spot, and we all took relatively similar but also very different ways to get to where we are today because they were personal to us. And yet, like Ren just said, everything you are saying is resonating with us, and we're like, yeah, duh, we agree. Like, no, obviously this makes sense to us. And so that's kind of the beautiful thing about not just stoicism but any sort of philosophy. It could be the Buddhist philosophies, it could be Taoism. Like, you study a lot of neuroscience as well, and psychology. All of these different studies in these different fields of study bring very similar solutions and very similar ideas if you are knowing where to look, if you're looking through the lens of self-mastery. And I just think it's very interesting that your background and our backgrounds are all similar yet quite different, and yet we all ended up in a very similar place.
One of the cool things I wanted to mention, first of all, amazing points from both of you, but Ren, with what you said, which is, if you're feeling down, try to uplift someone else, is this idea of taking your own advice, which is, have you guys ever found that in your own life and in your own relationships and stuff that, you give incredible like relationship advice, let's say, and then like end up not taking it yourself, like to your friend who's like in a relationship, you're giving him like the best of the best, and then you're like, afterwards, you're like, damn, why am I not doing that? Why am I not applying that? And that's what it is too, is like, if you're feeling a little bit down, like an exercise that you can try is if someone else came up to you and said, hey man, I'm feeling a little down. What is the advice that you would give them? And usually you'll find that your own advice is pretty good. Like if someone's feeling down, it's like, hey man, did you exercise today? What's the quality of your thoughts like? Are you focusing on things outside of your control? And you give that other person advice, and then you go, oh wait, why am I not taking my own advice? Right? I don't know if you guys have ever run into that. I think it's so funny. It's something
Yeah,
that
it's kind of,
yeah.
for me, it's like the pressure and especially it happens with relationships. It's kind of like the cliche with relationship advice. Like I'll have friends who, are maybe lacking confidence. And so I'm like, all right, here's what you say to this girl and she'll be interested in you. And then it works out. And I'm like, what the hell, man? Why isn't this happening for me? Like, where is this in my life?
Yeah.
But no,
Yes.
it's certainly, and I think it's something to be said still that we can feel fulfilled and we can be so happy about it, even if we aren't taking our own advice. And that's like just the power of uplifting people, like you said, is, even if I don't take my own advice 100% of the time, at least I'm making somebody else happy, right? And I'm spreading happiness and joy in the world.
Yes. And well, the key thing is do take your own advice. When you notice yourself doing that,
Yeah, yeah.
take it. One of the quotes that I love so much comes from a well-known author, Deepak Chopra. He says, whatever you want, practice giving it away. Right? So if you want more wealth in your life and better financial situation, practice helping someone else out with their finances or leaving an extra big tip for a waiter who's working with or who was serving you. If you want happiness, practice uplifting other people. If you want love, practice loving others and practice. And then what you'll find is that you actually knew what to do all along, right? And that's the thing too, is like stoicism and the tools that I give in my book, they act as guidelines, but what I try to help the reader begin to understand is like these ideas and these principles were within them all along. And it starts to create a wonderful feeling of self-empowerment. And then we go back to this idea of the psychology and school systems, which is a lot of talk therapists and a lot of these psychologists, they aren't giving you tools to become better. So I meet with life coaching clients, and what I always say is my job is to put myself out of a job. My job is to give you the tools and techniques that you need to the point where you're self-empowered to do it yourself, and then I'm gone. From you know what to do, right? But of course, for a lot of psychologists and these other people, that doesn't provide as much of a consistent paycheck. That's the thing with me though, is and what I found is it's not about the true wealth. Let's say the true wealth, the true abundance is the ability to uplift and give freely. That's what we need to see more of in school systems, in psychology fields, right? Which is people in jobs to put themselves out of a job, which seems paradoxical, but if someone's depressed, not just meeting with them for years and years and years, but giving them the tools so that they themselves become self-empowered, so that they realize that they are a master unto themselves.
Yeah, I consider that like the field of psychology and talk therapy really should be considered a service industry, right? We are like they are
Yes.
here to serve you to a purpose where it is being uplifted and getting out of the negative state that you're in. But it's not that, right? And not to generalize, I'm sure that there are a lot of therapists out there who do look out for the true
Yes.
well-being of their clients, but it certainly is a trend. And I did talk therapy for a while, and I actually had one of those therapists who wanted to put himself out of a job. And so it's not a generalization, but if we view psychology and these therapy, this just the mental health sphere, right, as a service industry rather as just like a job to make a living, I think ironically both the therapists themselves are going to feel better. They'll still make money for sure because therapy is very expensive, as I'm sure we're both aware of. They'll both feel fulfilled in terms of the sense that they are doing well in the world, and they're satisfied because they're making a living. And it's a scary thing for people to, I think, consider, because we're conditioned, right? To bring back up conditioning, we're conditioned to always be financially secure, right? We go through high school, to go to college, to get a degree, to get a job, so we can have housing, we can have food, and we can be financially secure. But at the same time, what does being financially secure mean when you don't know who you are and you aren't making a true impact in the world? I think is the question that I've kind of confronted as we've done the podcast and had this platform is, I obviously want to be financially secure, but I don't want that to come at the expense of me not making a true difference in the world. And it's something that I think we need more of in Gen Z. And I think it's actually more present in Gen Z than a lot of previous generations, because we've seen the results, right? We've seen the results of people who are just purely motivated by self-interest and being financially secure. And it's not pretty, but
Yeah.
we have the opportunity to change that.
And that's one of the biggest issues I see in the psychology space. And again, this is not a generalization for all therapists. There's a lot of wonderful, wonderful people working in that space. But when I was 14, I broke my arm, and when I went to the doctor, he didn't say let's amputate. He said, no, let's put you in a cast, let's rehab you, let's get you going, so you don't got to come back here into the ER room every couple weeks. Like in a couple months, you'll be good to go. And I think that's what we need to see the psychology and neuroscience fields as, or the psychiatry fields as, which is, it's a service industry, right? Not to have people that are just constantly reliant, but to self-empower them to begin to move forward, right? And that kind of brings us back to this idea of what we see in our culture, in our society, of this very materialistic society. And that is not to say that I don't value abundance in the material goods in my life. Like I have a car, I love my car. It's very helpful to have. I have an Xbox. I have certain things that are maybe what we could call material, and they're wonderful and they provide value to my life. But we live in a society where we also see millionaires chasing more and more and more and trying to fill this void within themselves. And I think that's the kind of society that we've grown up in, where when we start to feel lonely, instead of going to the root cause, like Stoicism teaches, that is within us, we look outside, we say, oh, if only I was in this relationship, then everything would be perfect. Or we say, oh, I have this older car. If only I had a brand new Porsche, then I would be happy. Or, oh, I'll let myself be happy in 20 years when I'm financially free and I don't have to work anymore. Until then, I'm just going to suffer and struggle. And it's this kind of constant chasing of well-being outside of ourselves. And I'm not talking about like survival needs, right? Like if someone doesn't have food or shelter or water, that's different. But for a lot of people listening to this and a lot of people in society, we have our basic needs met. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't pursue more, but this feeling of I'm going to be miserable until I get what I want is something that I think Stoicism really helps with, and really cuts through, because it doesn't work, right? We know of celebrities and actors and these very wealthy people who seemingly have it all, and they're constantly looking for more because they're unfulfilled. They're not happy. And they're sometimes even the most miserable people in society. And that's something that I really want to help with, because when you start to understand what true inner abundance is, this abundance of joy, this abundance of health, this abundance of well-being, then you can actually appreciate and you actually put yourself in a better position to receive the external abundance as well, the abundance of connections and relationships, the abundance of finances, and so on and so forth.
I think it's very important that you bring up what it actually means to be fulfilled internally. It's funny you bring up celebrities. We did a celebrity episode actually not all that long ago. But interestingly enough, about the materialistic society, there's a few points you brought up, so I'm gonna narrow it down. One, backtracking just for a moment back to therapy. Have you heard of rational emotive behavior therapy?
I that rings a bell, but I can't like say I have.
So it's basically just a form of psychotherapy where you're identifying your negative thoughts, essentially. And I don't remember which episode we talked about this on, but there was a study from the APA, the American Psychological Association, and they were basically saying one of the best ways to improve your mental health is by stop thinking negative thoughts. And I was like, as much as we like to sometimes hate on like, big pharma and all these big companies that like seem to care more about profit than actually helping people out, it's that there's a stoic work right in the APA. It's you got to stop thinking all these negative thoughts if you want to improve your mindset. It's really not rocket science. So that was my point back on the therapy side. And like you said, it's not a generalization because many people in those fields are fantastic people with the intent of helping, people like us out who sometimes need guidance. However, then this brings me to the point where you brought up root cause. Whenever somebody says root cause, I'm like, oh, let's talk about root cause, because this could be, mental health, physical health, medicine, anything. You're very passionate about reforming the psychological realm, right? This field. And one thing we know just about, I guess, the big pharma industry in general, it's medicine, it's mental health, etc., is you walk into a place and they're like, here's some pills for your mental health. Here's a symptom treater, but there's no actually addressing of the root cause. And we see this all the time, and especially with education. Ren and I are very passionate about the reforming of the education system as a whole, and I know that we discussed that a little bit off air with you too. But you can have fantastic teachers, you can have fantastic professors who want you to learn how to think, not what to think. But if the system itself is broken, there's really not going to be a lot of success within the education system, as you're working for sort of a broken system which needs fixing at the source. Now, I don't want to get conspiratorial, the Rockefeller stuff about this right now, but when talking about the root cause and in psychology, you like you said, you walk into you break your arm, you walk into a doctor's office, and they'll say, "Well, I just cut it off. It's fine." It's you sort of have to, they put you on a better track. So about root cause, and we're talking about philosophy. The root cause that we sort of identified with mental health is, like you said, it starts in here. And so I want you to relate psychology back to Stoicism again. And when we're talking about the root cause of your experience with depression, what did you notice that when you really dug deep and you addressed the root cause, how have you really been, flourishing since, besides waking up with this new spark every day? You sort of cut it off at the source. And what are the real benefits that you've seen since then?
Yeah, so it's awesome that you say that, because that's one of the main things I talk about is going to that root cause, and that's what Stoicism talks about as well. And the analogy, I'll go back to the thorn analogy. If you get a thorn in your arm, right? You know that the moment you pull it out, it's gonna be like a little it's gonna kind of sting a little bit. It's not gonna feel so good, but once it's out, and you're good, right? And I think that's what happens with our internal state, which is we start to feel a little socially anxious, and so we pull out our phones and we go on Instagram, or we start to feel a little bit upset or depressed, so we reach into the cabinet and grab some snacks or some food. And then that's like the small ways it manifests, and then it manifests in more extreme ways. We start to feel really anxious, we turn to drugs, we turn to alcohol in obviously unhealthy ways, right? And it gets worse and worse and worse, which is there's a very big difference between looking to the outside world to express something versus to take something. And that's what the root cause is, which is, when I started to go through these feelings of anxiety, my first thought, like any human being, I wasn't guilty or bad or wrong. I just never been given the understanding, which is, what can I get that would make me feel better? Can I get a new girlfriend? Can I get more money? Can people like me more? Can people talk about me in a better way? Can I change all these things and take from the outside in order to feel okay within myself? And what I found is that paradigm flip of, it's the way that you can identify true inner well-being is, you no longer look to take from the outside, you look to express to the outside. So in a relationship, instead of taking validation from someone else, you look to give your time and your energy and your love to someone else, whether that's a friend or an intimate relationship or whatever it might be, a family member. you know and that's the same thing with, it goes along with so many other things. And I heard a wonderful guy, I forget his name, the other day. He's in the psychology space, and he was talking about happiness, and he was talking about the big difference between pleasure and happiness, which is, pleasure is like quickly pulling out social media and getting that quick dopamine hit, right? Or reaching into the pantry and grabbing a snack to get that dopamine hit. And he said that pleasure can be a wonderful thing when you have true inner well-being. It's a cherry on top. To enjoy a nice dessert or an ice cream cone, if you're already feeling happy and fulfilled, is wonderful. But what leads to obesity is when we start to feel really negative within ourselves, and then we turn to food as an escape. And that can again be used with anything else, right? Going on social media and seeing a few funny videos is wonderful when we're not in a state of avoiding our anxiety. And so the first step to identifying that is, you first have to identify, what I am seeking lies within me, not outside. That's the first step. The second step is, when you do start to feel negative, you have to be willing to sit with it, just even for a few moments, even if it feels uncomfortable. And that's where I try to provide a framework of tools and ideas, which is, how do we go about that? Because I can say that and it's very simple, but it's not easy. And that's what we find too with, finding inner well-being, is it's very simple. The ideas are very simple. Change your thoughts, right? That's a very simple idea, but it's not always easy. And that's where the framework and the tools and the ideas that we see in Stoicism really come into play, because the fundamental principles are very simple. Change your thoughts, take care of your body, stop controlling things outside of your control. These are super simple ideas. The actual application of them, until it becomes second nature and natural, that's where the work kind of lies. And that's where, your podcast and my work kind of come together to try to help people make it through that process, right? I don't know if you guys have anything to add to that.
Yeah, no, it's really funny that you bring up social media, because I like all of the kind of like parallels you draw. Like, we live in a choice of fear or love, and I think one of the biggest ones that we forget in this generation is, we live in an era of choice between instant gratification, like you mentioned, whether it's food or whatever pleasure you might have that's quick access and it doesn't take work to achieve, or purpose, which takes a lot of work to achieve. And it's understandable, right? If you are somebody who doesn't know what your purpose is and you're kind of lost, you're going to choose that thing that's very easy, that's very quick, doesn't take any work to achieve, and you can always have it, versus purpose, which takes a lot of hard work, a lot of uncomfortability. Like you said, you pull the thorn out, it hurts for a little bit, it stings for a little bit. When you're in a journey of self-awareness and self-discovery, you're going to discover some things you don't like about yourself, and you're going to have to work to change them, and it's going to be uncomfortable. It sucks. I think all three of us have probably had some of those aspects within our lives already. It's not so fun, but you have to get through it, right? To get to that point where these sources of instant gratification can be the cherry on top, instead of just like your entire life revolves around them. And it's a place where you have to take a little bit of pain. You have to take, a couple of years of self-discovery and a lot of being uncomfortable, having these states where, like, this sucks, man. Why am I doing this? But at the end of the road, you see this light, and then this light, you get to share it with everybody. That's what I think the journey is. And we have to constantly express that, because, we grow up, especially in America, really cushy, and being uncomfortable. We don't like that. We like to be comfortable. We like to be happy. We like to not be challenged. And I think self-mastery, especially when you begin and you sit down and you say, I need to do this, it's the opposite of all of that. So just having these resources out there, that's what they're for, is so that when you feel uncomfortable, when you feel like it sucks, you have people who, and especially for our generation, people our age, who say it's worth it, because at the end of the day, you see the light at the end of the tunnel, and you get to wake up and you have this spark. For me, I wake up, I go outside, and I have a nice view in my home of like a nice open space. I'm like, wow, the world is so beautiful. I'm so happy that I'm here. And so any message like that, you get to wake up with that. It takes hard work, but it's worth it at the end.
It's kind of this idea of, in actuality, the uncomfortability is actually the path of least resistance. And people talk about this idea of like, oh, you have to be disciplined and stuff, which is very true. And you have to go through this. But what it really is you just need to broaden your perspective, which is in the overall spectrum of your life, what's more uncomfortable? Never working out or working out and going through that pain of working out, right? Which is, I wouldn't even call it pain. I would maybe call it just, a little bit of resistance, a little bit of hard work. I actually really enjoy my workouts. And I think people, when they start to get into it, do. But that's besides the point. It's, what's more uncomfortable, the 45 minutes to an hour, 15 minutes that you're going to put into this one workout, or when you're, 60, 70 years old and you can't move anywhere without being in a state of pain, right? And it's the same thing too, is like, okay, getting started on a project that you really want to get started on, and that there's going to be some resistance that you overcome there, or looking back 10 years later with the pain of regret that you never took a chance on it, that you never started it. So it's actually, in spirituality, they talk about the path of least resistance. And then the Stoics, they talk about this idea of discipline and moving forward. And what I found is they actually are the same thing. They actually go together, which is the path of least resistance is to pull out the thorn. I mean, what's harder? Walking around with like 10 thorns in your arm everywhere you go and trying to not touch anything that aggravates them, or taking the moment to just pull it out, right? And that's what it is too, which is, what's worse, letting yourself sink into a state of deep depression, or taking a few moments to sit with that feeling, that uncomfortable feeling that might be within you, whether it's anxiety, tension in your chest, tension in your throat, tension in your stomach, sitting with it, identifying it, and removing that inner thorn. So one last analogy too is that I go back to that river analogy. If a river is flowing and there's a boulder there, do you have to add so much more water to the river to get it to keep flowing, or do you just have to remove the boulder? Right? That's what you have to do, is you just have to remove that inner thorn. It's all about letting go and letting in, but that actually is the path of least resistance. And if you're given the proper framework, whether it's through Stoicism or the tools that I provide with self-mastery or any other means, because as you said, Ren, there's so many now online, you will actually find that it's quite an enjoyable process, I find, is because who doesn't want to move more towards happiness? Who doesn't want to remove the thorns in their arm, right? To use that analogy, there are thorns of anxiety or social anxiety, or the thorn of insecurity, or whatever it might be that's affecting your internal world.
Well, I like the idea of the path of least resistance because it's a quote from a book. I don't remember which book, but it's basically saying discipline weighs ounces and regret weighs tons. And that's very true because it's like you said, while it may be difficult to put in the work like in the gym or something, which by the way, we all love the feeling of pain during a workout. It's unmatched. It feels so good. But
Feels
like
good.
that's something that's very difficult to push yourself through if you're just starting. But like you said, I would rather do that for an hour and a half a day, and then instead of taking the other path of regret. Now I have a question for you, because something that you talk about a lot, which I really appreciate, is in order to receive, like, you have to have this mindset of giving first. So have you ever read the book called The Go-Giver by Bob Berg?
I've heard of it. I've never read
Yeah,
it.
I would highly recommend it because you're an entrepreneurial individual. Clearly, you have your own brand that you're working on. But basically, the premise of the book is, in the world of business, if you want to sell something, the goal shouldn't be to gain profit. The goal should be to provide value to other people. It's that similar principle, authenticity in the world of business, right? And
Yes.
it's fantastic. It's a great principle to live by, and that just reminded me. So if you haven't read The Go Giver, I would highly recommend it. It totally changed my perspective on business
I
and
would I
just
would love to jump in on that real quick, because one of the things that I was first kind of doing is, I'm a pretty spiritual guy by nature. I don't subscribe to one particular belief system, like one religion. I kind of find truth in them all and many different teachings and stuff. But one of the things I always heard that we hear in a lot of different religious and spiritual traditions is the pursuit of like business or anything like that is a negative. But when I started to look at YouTube videos of like these different business guys talking, and it was that same principle, which is, the principle in spirituality is serve others with all of your heart. The principle of all successful business is serve others with all your heart. Because when you provide the most value, that's what makes your business the most successful. Why is Amazon so big? It's because it provides extreme value. I can go on my phone and I'm 2 clicks away from having something arrive on my doorstep the next day, right? And it's the same thing. Why do I go to one coffee shop and not another? It's whichever one is providing the most value, whether that's the environment, the whatever, the product that they're providing, when you provide the most value, it's kind of a principle of the universe, which is you start to receive much more. What you put out is what you get back. When you look to give freely, you can also receive freely, right? And that's why, again, this idea of self mastery is so powerful, is because self mastery is what empowers you to be able to give so much of yourself. You know, you're kind of like, imagine like a river with no resistance in it, no boulders. So it's running freely to the point where it's overflowing. It's nourishing the landscape around it. And that's what we get to become as human beings, which is if I'm overflowing with abundance, with joy, with confidence, with wisdom, you know, all these other wonderful qualities, it starts to naturally radiate out and assist and help and uplift other people. And so this idea of serving other people is what I found to be a foundational teaching, not only in my spiritual belief systems, but also in business, in my family relationships, in my relationships, in any other arena of life. This idea of how can I give so much of myself? How can I give all of my talents and all of my abilities to what it is I'm doing without attachment to the outcome, without like saying, oh, I'll give you a compliment if you give me one back. You know, that kind of idea that keeps us very trapped. So I think you saw I got quite excited when you mentioned that because I gave one of these.
Well, I'm glad
Yeah,
you did though, because
yeah.
it's a very big and important thing, and that's when Stoicism was first founded, it was essentially taught on like a back porch, like a backyard, very to like 5, 10 people. And as soon as all of these people who were being taught the school of philosophy, they're like, oh my gosh, I have to go out and share this message. Like you said, they were overflowing. It was about community. It was about something that was bigger than themselves. And you keep mentioning, the work that you do, and I'm curious because, like you said, there are, and like Ren said, there's so many available resources online. It seems like nowadays everyone's like, oh, I can be a consultant or a self-help guide, and fair enough, we all have value to provide, but what about your program specifically really like stands out from all these very like cliche, self-help guides or these free courses or whatnot have?
There's a few things. One is that I am a part of Gen Z, and I've also gone through the issues that people have gone through. So, like, it's one thing if you hire a personal trainer who's just ripped right off the bat, but if you hire a personal trainer who was once out of shape, got into shape themselves, and is now able to teach you, they've been through that experience. Every person that I meet with, my absolute number one intention is just how can I serve them in every way possible? Because I know what it's like to be in that state of anxiety. I don't want them to be there, right? I want nothing more than to see them thrive. I tell all of my clients, I'm your biggest fan. I'm here with you. If you need to meet extra, if you need to call me even outside of a coaching call or anything like that, I'm here for you. I'm here with you. Right? So that's the one thing. I would say the next thing too is that because there is so many thousands of resources, because this is my passion, what I've done is I've literally looked into what is probably at this point thousands of resources, so many hundreds of different teachings and teachers, and boiled them down to the fundamental principles that cannot be misunderstood, right? And so some people might be looking and say, how does Taoism connect with Stoicism? And how does that connect with modern neuroscience and psychology? And they feel overwhelmed going into a space where they're like, I don't have the time to read 50 books, but because that's my passion and what I love so much, it's what I do every day for fun is I read all these different books. But I connect these ideas to a point where even a fifth grader or a third grader could understand the core principle truths that connect Taoism with Stoicism, with neuroscience, with psychology, with different religious and spiritual ideas, with all these other ideas. And so I try to offer simplicity. So to anyone who's feeling overwhelmed and doesn't know where to start, I offer what not only what has worked in my life, what has worked in the lives of those that I've shared these with, whether it's clients or family members or friends, but I'm ever seeking to simplify it so that someone doesn't feel overwhelmed by the information, so that anyone could read through like my book or to be able to have a conversation with me and get ideas that can immediately that same day start to change their life. So I would say those are the two or three main things that I really try to seek and provide value in.
Well, that's key. That's key. Just a quick response to that is that's key. Is one, simplicity, but you have the credibility. You've been there, right? Like you said, like you would never go to a doctor who's morbidly obese and take their health advice. I mean, we do that
Yes.
anyway today, which is sort of ironic, not to
Yes.
start like sparks or anything, but good. I thank you. for that
Yeah, and
answer.
I also think, to add to that, the passion. I think, if you, for people who get to actually like see you speak about this, like your eyes light up, like you're very, very passionate about it, and everybody can tell. And I think that's something that we need a lot more of, right? We have people who, we talked about it a lot, are in it for the money. I think when you can clearly see somebody who's as passionate about this any topic as you are about this topic, it's indicative like this person has it going on, because they're going to stick through it through thick and thin because it's what they love. And it's something I really admire, because I'm the same way, where people, I'll bring a book to my lecture, and I'll be reading a book in the back of class, and they're like, "What are you doing, man? Like, why are you reading?" And I have a lot of friends who don't read for fun, and they're like, "This is weird. Why are you reading 6 books a week or something like that?" It's because those books are like fuel. I don't know if you kind of share the same sentiment, but those books are fuel that like keep me going, where I like discover something new every single day, and it just keeps me hungry, keeps me like, I'm just so hungry for the knowledge of how to live fulfilled. And so it's something I really loved, and it's very clear just watching you talk, like that is something you believe in.
One of the things that I love giving to people too who are struggling to find a sense of purpose is I give them this thought experiment, which you guys have probably heard before in some way or another. And I'm sure this is maybe even talked about in Stoicism. I'm not totally sure, which is, imagine now that you had all the time in the world and all the money in the world. So those two things were not issues for you. What would you spend your time doing? And when you ask that question, your passion will start to arise within you. And then when you pursue that, regardless of the money or anything, paradoxically, the universe kind of has a way of supporting you. And not to plug my own book directly, but there's a chapter in there called The Passion Principle, Living a Life of Purpose, where I teach people how to find their passion, because people are often seeking that. They're saying, how do I find my passion? What is it? Where is it? And it's actually so simple. And people often think that pursuing their passion is the risky route in life. I think it's the only one that makes sense, because whatever you're passionate about and whatever you love, you're going to succeed in one way or another. It might not look the way that you think it's going to look initially, but you have to pursue your passion. I actually see it as a human need, that we have like these different needs for our survival needs, and then needs for connection and love and support. And I think one of those human needs is authentic self-expression. We need to pursue our passion. We need to express it to the world. And it's something that I love so much.
Yeah, I'm surprised I've lasted this long without mentioning Viktor Frankl, especially because he's somebody who really comes closest to like intersection between neuroscience and psychology, and then philosophy. And he has a saying that those who have a why in life can bear almost any how. And that's what I think it is you have that burning passion. And if somebody says something negative about that passion, you're like, I don't care, man. Like, I enjoy this so much, your words mean nothing to me. So you go through any hardship, and as long as you have like that one vision in mind of, this is my why, then you can survive almost anything. That's one of the things we teach on this podcast as well, is whether you believe in stoicism or not, at least find a purpose and cling to it, because that's how you can survive in a world that wants to hit you with so much information all the time. Through all of that information, whether it's negative, you mentioned like the news, like war and violence, crime, whatever the news is, negative, positive, you survive because you have that purpose in mind, and you fit that purpose to the situation happening to you, right? You don't change your purpose, you don't change your mindset with the situation, because it's all purpose driven. So I'm surprised I've lasted this long without mentioning Viktor Frankl, but had to get him in there because love that guy. But yeah, it's all about purpose. It really is, and that passion is a crucial part of it.
Yes. Yeah, that's really what it is. And that's one of the other things too. One of the other pieces of advice I sometimes give to people is, if you're struggling to feel passionate about your life, or you're a little bit down in the dumps, you're going through a challenge, maybe you're going through a breakup, or you're feeling a little depressed or a little anxious, is find a story that you really resonate with. Maybe it's a movie character that you resonate with it. Maybe it's a TV show character, a book character, or even just a real life character that you really resonate with, and tune into that energy of passion. When we go to the movies and we watch a really wonderful movie, and the main character starts to go through challenges, that's not when we shut it off and we leave the theater and we're like, they started to go through challenges. That's when we're on the edge of our seat. That's when we're seeing, how are they going to transform this? What's going to happen here? How are they going to overcome this, right? And so that's one of the powerful ideas too, is I think especially for Gen Z, where we do go through so many challenges, is seeing challenges as exciting, saying like, how am I going to transform this? What's going to happen? Seeing yourself as the main character is not a narcissistic thing. I actually think it's a very selfless thing to do, because you then are kind of like a shining light for other people to see themselves as the hero of their own story as well, right? When we don't see our lives as this grand adventure that we get to take by the reins and move in the direction that we want, and that we are self-empowered, that's when we fall into fear and melodrama, and we get caught up in things that in short-term pleasure seeking. When we connect to this larger narrative that is both our own unique path and our own unique authenticity, and our story as a human family, right, as this human collective, then life becomes very interesting again, very exciting again, and we're able to really overcome anything. That's how I try to see it in my life. If I'm dealing with a challenge where I'm going through something like that, the first thing I say now is this is a mantra that anyone who's listening can maybe apply, is I just say, how exciting. How exciting. Even if I'm sitting in a classroom, I go to college, and if I'm sitting in a classroom and I'm a little bit bored by what the professor might be saying, I just will start writing down in my journal, how exciting. How exciting, how exciting. And just, again, changing your thoughts and shifting into that new perspective is so powerful. So I offer that to people, which is, whatever you're going through in your life, I know it may sound silly at first, just say to yourself, how exciting, and you're going to be amazed at what happens after.
The piece of advice you gave about the movie character, there's a scene in a movie that men will just look at and be like, hell yeah. And that's Creed 2, the training scene in the desert from Creed 2, where he's at the lowest of lows and the music's playing
I love that
and he's
one.
training. And me and my friends, we're like, bro, we'll go watch Creed 2 if you're down. And as funny as it is, it's so true, because you see someone that you're like, you see a lot of yourself in, or you that you could be, like someone who works hard, someone who's honest, someone who's honorable. And then it's very easy to relate. I mean, that was my gosh, at the beginning of sometimes when I would work out and I didn't want to at like 5 a.m., I would just turn on the Creed 2 training scene and be like, let's go. But it's
Yeah.
good. That's a great piece of advice. And I'm like, you could take it as corny, I guess, if you really wanted to, or you could really look at it for what it is and be like, no, that works. And the thing that Ren mentioned about your passion is, I was going to say the same thing. I mean, we say an idea and then you get up close to the screen, you're like, yeah, like, let's go. The thing about passion, and I've noticed this for myself, and you said you're a public speaker, I've gotten to be a much better speaker when I speak about things that I am passionate about. If I were to speak on something like, I don't know, how tires are ruining the environment or something, I don't know, something like that I don't really care about, I'd be like okay at it. But when it's something so empowering and something that we can provide value to people with, it's very easy to speak. And so, if you heard of the ikigai, that Japanese concept, you combine four things: what you're good at, what you love, what the world needs, and how you can make money. And that's basically the idea of how to create a fulfilling, career, fulfilling life, and whatnot.
I
But
love that. I love that one so much, the Ikigai. I make it just 3 steps, which is I tell people to write out a long list of what they love, and then from that list of what they love, what they're good at or what they want to get good at, and then how they can use it to provide value to other people, is the 3 steps. It's such a beautiful teaching. Anyways, continue.
No,
Continue on.
exactly. And really the thing about money is you could totally leave that out and be totally fine, because that's really not what's important. But the point is like, yes, some people are like, "Oh, don't follow your passion. Your passion will make you money." Screw money, right? Okay, we're talking about internal fulfillment, and we know that, I mean, there are arguments that money buys happiness, money doesn't, whatever. There's certain aspects to both of which are true. But your passion is something that you should follow. There's a reason that we feel passion in our lives, and thus we should follow it to be fulfilled. Anyway, that's my point, Ren. I know you had something to add, but I just wanted to say as well, I did notice your passion, and that's why it's so enjoyable talking to you. It's very nice.
Yeah, well, and we talk about main characters too. Main characters are always doing what they're doing for others as well. It's not like you have this main character who is going on this solo journey and he doesn't care about anything else, and his sole goal is like, look at me, like, look at what I'm doing. Like in every story, there's somebody they care about. There's somebody they're doing it for, and there's somebody that they're reciprocating value into the world for. And so I think, we talk about narcissism when it relates to main characters. Main characters are the exact opposite of narcissists, because they've realized, I have this great skill, I've gone through these trials, and I can inspire people, I can provide value to the people around me, and I can really take care of those who I love. And that's exactly what we should model our lives off of. And it kind of relates back to when you were saying like self-mastery is the biggest gift you can give to the people around you. there's no bigger truth of that than when you look at like Batman or whatever like stereotypical hero you want to look at. Like there's no bigger truth than that. They're doing it in service of others. So, take inspiration from that, right? Take inspiration from their strength and accepting the challenges, but also acknowledge how much they care about the people around them and model yourself off of that as well.
My go-to one is, you guys ever watch Avatar: The Last Airbender?
Of course,
I love,
of
oh my
course,
God, I
of
love that
course.
show. My go-to is Avatar Aang. He's the one that I resonate with the most because I've always kind of had just this kind of bubbly energy, and he's like this young kid who's like going on this adventure, and he's got to like do all this fun stuff, but he never forgets to also like live in the moment and have fun too. That's a good one for people. If you're looking for one, Avatar Aang, I highly recommend anyone watch that show. But Mateo, you mentioned public speaking. I'm still working on my public speaking skills. I do love to speak publicly, and that's one of the key things. Is there's a kind of really three-step formula to really good public speaking, and this also works for anyone who's struggling with social anxiety, which is, one is, talk about what you love and what you're actually interested in, because that's so much easier to talk about. The second one is, hold a very clear intention to uplift other people through what you love. Because those two alone, that could really be just a two-step formula, is when you're speaking about what you love and what you're excited about, and you're looking to uplift other people, you're already so much more interesting than anyone else. Even if you don't have the perfect words to formulate it, even if you're not the most perfect fluid communicator yet, those two are so key. And then the rest, the kind of third step, is then it's like a little bit of preparation. It's a little bit of honing your skills. But if you just had those two things, which is finding what you love and looking to uplift other people through it, I mean, that's not even just public speaking advice. That's like life advice. That's for any arena of your life is going to improve when you do that. Because what happens is, when a lot of people public speak, they get very internally focused. They call it like spotlight awareness. It's like, when I'm speaking, am I saying things right? How are people perceiving me? What are they thinking about me? And that's the same thing with social anxiety too, which is, do they like me? Do they not like me? It's very internal. What you want to have is lighthouse awareness, where your light, the light that you have within and that you're harboring within, your authenticity, is radiating out to everyone else. That's what you really want to cultivate when it comes to good public speaking, good social connections. Is you find that light within, that spark within, that enthusiasm, that passion, that excitement, and then you radiate it out. It's no longer about you, it's about everyone else. Because why would it be about you? Because you already feel so fulfilled. You already feel peace. You already feel happiness, right? There's a beautiful quote which says, love loves expression. It loves expressing itself. So when you feel that, the first and natural thing you want to do is just give it to everyone else around you.
Yeah, and one tool I like the lighthouse awareness aspect, and it's Seneca has a quote about like, if you want to be loved, then love. And I think that one of the greatest ways to express like what you're passionate about, what you love, expressing all these things, are first through actions, but then if we talk about public speaking, through words and through intentions through your words. And another thing I've noticed is with the metaphor you just made, it really boils down to the dichotomy of control, right? We can't control how others perceive us and what we speak, and if we make a mistake, right, we don't control how people respond to that. And that's something that, I've had public speaking experience. I did speech and debate in high school for 4 years. So I've been there, done that when it comes to public speaking.
He's a state champ at speech and debate, is what he's trying to say. Yes.
We're editing
Wow. Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, but so that's like, and I kind of flipped a switch, honestly, when I found Stoicism for public speaking. It flipped a switch like sophomore, junior year, where I went from like I was competitive to I was winning, is because I realized like the nerves that I feel are just entirely dependent on me, right? Because I can't control how these people are going to react. I'm talking about political issues, right? Like, even if I give this perfect speech, if they don't like the topic I'm speaking on, like, they're going to react negatively. I can't do anything about that. So it's like pairing the tools of like passion and also like what is really a Stoic concept of like, I can't control their reactions. I can't control their perceptions of my public speaking. I can just realize I come in here and I do the best job possible, and I should be happy with that. And those were like the two that combined for me in terms of like not mastering public speaking, but getting a lot better at it.
It reminds me of a beautiful teaching that I love for overcoming anxiety and depression, which is this idea of zooming in and zooming out. So that when you're feeling anxious and afraid of what other people are thinking about you, zoom out. Broaden your perspective. In 2 days, in a week, not even, usually it's like in a couple minutes, they're not really going to care. If you stumble and you mess up, They have other things that they're dealing with. They're not going to like be thinking about you 24/7. And that's what our mind kind of, it's that trick that it plays on us, which is, oh my God, if I stumble and mess up, then they're going to be thinking about me for the rest of their lives. No, they're not, right? So that's zooming out. So when you're feeling anxious, zoom out. And it's kind of zooming out into wisdom, which is zooming out into this broader, vaster perspective. But then if you're feeling a little cold, feeling a little isolated, feeling a little depressed, that's when you want to zoom in into love. Care about how you're affecting other people around you. Notice how your actions are having an effect on your life and the lives of those around you. So it's that idea again, which is zooming into love, into the moment, enjoying life. It's seeing the meaning of all of your actions and all of your words as they're happening. And then also zooming out into wisdom, seeing the broader perspective of your whole life, of other people's lives, is a really powerful teaching. So if you're feeling anxious, zoom out. If you're feeling depressed, zoom in. And that was one that really, really helped me.
I think a great thing too about when we're talking about just communication and speaking as a whole, the thing that Stoics emphasize, and this is an Epictetus quote. We haven't brought up Epictetus much in this episode, but he says, "We have two ears and one mouth, therefore we should listen twice as much as we speak." And a big component to to communication and to speaking and not being as nervous is to listen first instead. I mean, oftentimes the people say, the quietest person in the room is often the person who is the most knowledgeable, the most observant. They are really taking in everything. And so sometimes if you're too nervous, to be in public and to speak, the best thing you can do is just listen and observe and then formulate. There's no rush. And Ren, and I, as similar as we are also very different in social situations. And this is something that you might not know, like from just like a podcast where we both speak, but typically, just to keep it simple, Ren is more introverted and I'm more extroverted typically. But this is interesting though, because what Ren does is I think Ren is a far better listener at times than I am because he doesn't speak as much and he likes to think about certain things. And so that's interesting. And when Ren was talking to me about speech and debate, it's not the loudest person in the room that wins the debate. It's the most logical. It's the person who uses reason. It's the stoic individual. And when we argue emotionally, oftentimes that's where we sort of lose track and we sort of get off road of logic and reason. And we might think we're winning the argument because we're louder, we're feeling more passionate. But there is a clear distinction between being passionate and then being unreasonable. So I just wanted to add that point in about speaking is because the way Stoics speak is very calm when they were debating in courts or, in places of where they were in high positions of authority. It was very calm, very rational. You never saw a Stoic lose their temper in a courtroom or anywhere else. But this is just a point I wanted to make.
No, that's a beautiful point, and that's such a key thing, which is as excited as you are to express your ideas, especially if you're someone who's extroverted, loves to talk, loves to express ideas. I would say I'm actually kind of somewhere in the middle, although when I get passionate about things, I definitely like to express my ideas, as you guys can probably tell, but also being able to deeply listen, right? And there's one thing too, which is, I saw this one quote, which was, and I forget exactly who it's from. You can tell when a man is wise when he's constantly looking to learn from those around him, which usually means he's in more of a state of stillness and reflection. Because if you're speaking, you're not learning, you're expressing, which is beautiful and wonderful, right? You have an authentic truth to express, you have your voice, and you should aim to express it. But, when I'm speaking now to you guys, I'm speaking, but I'm not learning from you guys, right? So that for just as much time as you're expressing and as you're speaking, you should also aim to deeply, deeply listen because you have so much more to learn. I mean, I've only lived through my set of life experiences. You guys have had totally different life paths, totally different experiences. So for me to think, or for anyone to think that they know everything there is to know, is the opposite of wisdom, right? Wisdom is understanding that all of these different perspectives are valid and that there is always something more to learn from any individual, even if it's someone who's very, very different from you. And so that's the one rule that I've kind of used in my life, which is as much as I try to express, I also try to deeply, deeply listen and really engage and show interest in other people's lives. And that's why, as you guys have been speaking, I've written down things like Viktor Frankl or was something that you mentioned, and like some of these other ideas and things that I'm going to check out after this podcast because there's always new stuff to learn. So, Yeah.
Yeah, in that vein, that thought process brings up another book that I just recently read. It's called Principles. It's by Ray Dalio. I don't know if I'm saying his last name right, but this man he was like the founder of Bridgewater Investments, which was one of the biggest hedge funds in the world. He made billions of dollars. And there's like a teaching that's constantly present in this book that the billionaires, the really successful people, the really true marker of intelligent people are those who are not like specialists in every area, but are willing to set aside like the fact that they don't know things in areas and listen to the people who do. That's what
Yes.
makes like a successful businessman, a successful man, just in general, a successful person is you can kind of put your ego to the side and say, you know what, I don't know anything about this, so let me
Yes.
learn from somebody who does.
The,
It's
the first the first step to learning is the ability to admit that you don't know something, because that's what creates curiosity. Young kids don't have this kind of egoic sense of like of I'm right or my opinions are right or wrong. They just want to learn. So they're like, "Oh, I was wrong. What about this? What about this?" They're constantly asking questions. I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I love what you're saying.
no, no, that's exactly right. Like and it's kind of, I think, now this is my personal opinion, we're kind of conditioned into that by the education system, right? Like where we're taught like, oh, raise your hand, like, like we teach to a test and like you're right, you're wrong. And you kind of lose that sense of like, you gain the sense of fear, right? In terms of being wrong, and you lose the value of curiosity. And that's something that I've thought about a lot in terms of, we talk about reform. That's one of my biggest gripes with the education system is it instills in us that fear of being wrong because we're punished for being wrong. Our grade suffers, we're ridiculed by our teacher or something. If you maybe not have a not so nice teacher, the class looks at you and is like, oh, how dumb is this person? And he doesn't know what 4 times 4 is. Like, what are you doing, man? But rediscovering that sense is key, because then you get to meet people, like the relationship that I think we've formed, and just truly sit here. And this isn't even a podcast episode. This is just us learning from each other. That's what I view it as, because, we give you resources, and a lot of the things you're saying, a lot of the metaphors I'm taking in, and I'm like, wow, like this is a very simplistic way to look at things. That I'm learning a lot here. And it's just that kind of sense, right? One of the examples that Dalio talks about is Elon Musk. When he founded SpaceX, he didn't know anything about rocket exploration. He was asked, like, what do you know about it? And he's like, nothing. I'm going to just read books. I'm going to learn from the people who do. And now look at how successful SpaceX is, right? Like, that's what makes you truly successful in your life, is the ability to set all of those kind of ego, pride, whatever you want to call it, that spurn from those negative emotions, and say, all of that's great, but I would much rather be a holistic well-being who is able to learn than somebody who's just known as like being the right person in the room.
That is so true, and that's what another thing too is the mark of a really wonderful philosopher is the constant willingness to be wrong, to immediately see if one idea that they might have had is out of alignment, and immediately then bring it, be able to integrate a new idea. To admit that you know nothing about something is the first step to being able to learn about something. So what you said is so true, and it brings me back to another idea which I've thought about so much recently, which is kind of this wheel of pride and shame, which is when we get attached to being right, we put ourselves above other people. It's like, oh, look, I'm right and they're wrong. But then the moment that we're wrong, we just go back down to shame. And we kind of find ourselves on this endless wheel of pride and shame, pride and shame. And this goes with so many things. It's like, oh, look, I got a 95% on the test, but they got a 97. Or, look, I won this competition, but I lost this one. And it's this constant wheel. And it reminds me of that quote, comparison is the thief of joy, which is we shouldn't look to compare, but we should look to uplift and be inspired by others. So comparison is looking at someone else and saying, why do they have that and I don't have it? Versus inspiration is looking at someone else who's in a position that you'd like to be and saying, what can I learn from them? What can I harbor from them? What can I gain? How can I grow and how can I expand? And that puts us on a much better wheel, which is the wheel of confidence and humility, which is true confidence and the ability to want to express your ideas and hold value within yourself, also comes from a deep state of humility, that you don't know everything, that you're constantly trying to learn. That idea, the wheel of humility and confidence and the wheel of pride and shame. Get off this one, go on to this one, and that comparison is the thief of joy.
Well, I like that's one of our favorite quotes. And I don't know if you saw, but as soon as you said that, me and Ray were like, yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
Because we talk about that all the time. And I think a very relevant example of that is in the gym for us three. I mean, we're both very clearly passionate about physical health. And I believe it was Seneca. Do not quote me on that, though. But he says it's a shame for man to grow old without ever discovering the capability of his physical strength or physical abilities. And
Yes.
I find that to be completely true. And as much as I like to think self mastery is very mental, I believe there is a physical strength and physical, aspect to it as well. Because our physical health is one of two things in this world that we cannot buy, the other one being time. And so, with your experience in your physical training, whether it's lifting or whether it's been running, probably a mix of both. You look like a very in shape kind of guy, which we appreciate. Takes a lot of hard work and dedication. But how is that aspect? We talk a lot about the mental, the psychological effects and the benefits, but what about the physical health side? I mean, how has that influenced your journey of self mastery?
Yeah, well, there's one quote that I love which says, "A happy man wants a million things, but a sick man only wants one." And that is, or a healthy man wants a million things, but a sick man only wants one, and that is to be healthy. And I mean, I ran into that too. I started lifting. I was a hockey player all throughout high school, but I started really getting into weightlifting and running and all forms of sports and exercise when I was started this journey of self mastery. It was integral to my journey, just as much as the mental emotional, which is what I really try to help people with specifically, because I think there's already a lot of information online about physical well being and not as much on the reformation of the fields of psychology, but physical health is absolutely integral. The mind and body work as one cohesive unit. You can't really separate the two. If you're physically unhealthy, you're more likely to be mentally unhealthy. And if you're mentally unhealthy, you're also more likely to be physically unhealthy, right? So those two ideas go directly together. And I remember being 16 years old in the gym, just starting out, and like kind of looking at my bicep, and I got a vein going, and I was like, "Oh, look at that! I'm kind of big." Like I'm looking around some of the other guys, and then like seeing a dude who was like twice my size, and I was like, "Oh." And that's again that wheel of pride and shame, right? Putting yourself above someone and putting yourself below someone else. And so I think the main thing is try to explore your own potential, right? Like we don't compare an evergreen tree to an oak tree. We acknowledge them both for how wonderful they are and come to really love your unique differences. I'm never going to be like Victor Wembanyama, 7'4", dunking in the NBA. I'm just not. I'm 5'10". It's not going to happen, right? Right? But for me, it's more of like, not how can I be stronger or better than this guy, but how strong can I get? How in shape can I get? What does my peak potential look like? And that's the really exciting journey, is moving towards that, not looking to someone else's potential, but looking towards your own. How can I take better care of my body? What does my potential look like intellectually too, academically, in any other pursuit, finances, whatever it is don't compare yourself to others. Be inspired by others. Take advice and gain wisdom from others, but compare yourself only to your own potential. And that's why in the book too, there's a whole section on physical mastery, physical health, physical well-being, everything I've garnered. I actually, this summer, I'm going to be attempting to become a certified personal trainer. And because I just love and care about physical health so much. So I want to have even more skills to help people that I work with. Uh, so yeah, that's my take on physical well-being. It's absolutely integral.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's comparison is the thief of joy again, right? Like if you get to a point where you're like benching 315, somebody's gonna come along and bench like 400 pounds, and you'll be like, damn man, like why can't I do that? There's always gonna be somebody better than you, especially when it comes to physical health. And so I think the comparison then is the only person you're trying to beat is the version of you from yesterday. That's like the main takeaway I've learned from my journey with like lifting and in the gym is the only person that I truly am accountable to beating is my version of myself yesterday. If I look like even 0.1% better than I did yesterday, I did something right. I did something very well. And that kind of root aspect is where you can find satisfaction. And I like that you say it's integral to mental and spiritual health, because it is, right? If you're having a tough day, your mental health took a beating, you go to the gym and you're like, wow, I look better than I did yesterday. It's kind of a good way to resolve things. So it's like it kind of like one hand feeds the other is how I kind of view physical health when it comes to the overall well-being.
Yeah, and what I try to do is when I look back at prior days, yes, I'm trying to grow and be better than that past self, but I'm also not putting that version of myself down. If anything, I kind of look back to my past and I thank that prior version of myself so it doesn't have a hold on me, right? So instead of saying like, "Oh, I'm like below where I want to be in the future," which is maybe true in some sense, like I hope that in the future I'm even healthier, even happier, like things are steadily growing, but it's not about pushing down against our who we were in the past, any mistakes that we've made, or our prior self. It's moving forward in a state of love and joy, growing from a state of love, not a state of self-rejection. I think we see that with a lot of young men, which is like, we look back at like prior versions of ourselves, or we look back at our mistakes and we go, God, I really messed up there. Like we get really hard on ourselves and really down on ourselves, instead of, what I kind of describe it as is try to run towards something, not away from something. Because that's what I feel like a lot of young guys do, right? Is they might get into the gym and they're running away from times in their life where they felt insecure and isolated, or maybe they were made fun of or bullied. But instead of running away from something, run towards the version of you that is happy and healthy and successful in all ways.
I like when you say happy and successful in all ways, because it's very easy to see success in only one way, right? I mean, typically now, especially, and you mentioned this before, but being in a materialistic society, we really only attribute success to money. And it's a very, very shallow way of looking at things. And one thing that I find very compelling about your story is that there's always, in great stories like yours and other people that, we've had on this podcast, is there's always that one moment, that one turning moment. For you, it was seeing that journal and writing down, I need help, right? And for other people, it's just having this moment of realization. Or for Ren, it was seeing meditations on the bookshelf. And for me, it was, I had a mentor a while back and he mentioned Stoicism, and I checked out, like I said, I also found meditations as well. So there's always that one key turning moment. And I think what's so influential about that turning moment is looking back on it years and years down the road. Because like you said, right, you've been on this journey for what, 4+ years, since you were 15. And, we've only been doing this podcast for about, just over a year, but we've been on a self-improvement journey for many years before that. And the beautiful thing is how much you realize you still have yet to learn. Is no matter how much experience we have in this field, we are learning new things every single day. And especially with lifting, I mean, I've been lifting for probably 3 years, and every single time I go into the gym, I learn something new. I'm like, oh, there's a better way to do this. And so being, like you said, about being a great philosopher, knowing that you almost want to be wrong all the time so that you can be right, because you can't have one without the other. So you're almost seeking the error in your own works so that you can eventually make it better and be more correct. But
it's so true. There's a quote that I love too, which said, failure are the seeds that sow success, right? Which is looking at our mistakes and being excited about them, right? Like, oh, it's like, for me, that's what's the most exciting. If I'm in the gym and I realize my form was a little off and someone corrects me on it, I'm not upset at them. I'm like, thank you. Now I'm even more excited about the gains that I'm going to see going down the road, right? Or same thing with an idea in life. Maybe we're holding on to a certain perspective about ourselves or just about life, or maybe it's a spiritual idea, and all of a sudden someone else like kind of offers a new perspective. We go, oh yeah, I think I like that one even a little more. That feels a little bit more in alignment. And so again, it's not about suppressing the negative. It's just about embracing the positive. It's not about pushing against anything. It's about running towards and embracing something else, right? And that's this is a kind of different point, but just for anyone listening who might be dealing with negativity, whether it's in the gym, insecurity, negative mental health, is one of the tools that I've applied in my own life, and I still apply every single day, that I think is so powerful, is this idea of combining love and wisdom to achieve personal growth and to move forward. And what I mean by that is, oftentimes when we have negative thoughts come up, let's say we're feeling insecure about the way we look, right? The kind of tendency is, oh no, get away. Like, why do you always do this? Why do you always judge yourself? We judge ourselves for judging ourselves, and it kind of becomes this endless loop, right? And so the first thing I say is, any time that you run into negativity, whether it's in your mental, emotional state, your physical state, whatever, greet it with love and compassion, right? Because that's a part of yourself that's kind of calling out to you, that is a part of yourself that didn't receive that love and compassion, right? And understanding that you're worthy of that love and compassion. And that even if you're not, perfect might not even be the right word. Even if you're not where you want to be, that no matter where you are or where you're starting out, you're worthy of unconditional love. So you greet whatever negativity is coming up. You greet the insecurity with a sense of love. Maybe you even say a few words to yourself, like, Ryan, I love you. I care about you. This is going to be okay, right? You greet that negativity. Then you use the power of wisdom, though. You don't stay there. You use the power of wisdom to then say, now what is it that I would like to create? What is it that I would prefer? So if the previous negative belief was, I really don't like the way I look, you greet yourself with love. I call it dissolving it in love. You greet the negative thought, I really don't like the way I look, with love and compassion, and then you use wisdom to tune yourself into a new potential. I love the way I look. I'm feeling confident. I'm feeling amazing. I'm feeling fantastic. And this is how we begin to change our lives. There's another beautiful quote, which is, change your thoughts, change your life. But in order to do that, we need to understand the way the mind works, which is, if I tell you guys right now, do not think of a purple elephant, the first thing on your mind is a purple elephant. If I tell you, don't think about cars, first thing on your mind is a car. And so that's not the way the mind works. So we can't look at our negative thoughts and our negative thinking or even our negative actions and say, don't do that. If someone's maybe trying to quit a bad habit, let's say they're smoking cigarettes all the time, and they say, don't smoke, don't smoke, don't smoke. All their attention and awareness is on not smoking. So what I do is I dissolve the negative behavior or the negative thought in a sense of love and compassion. I honor it, I accept it, I give that unconditional love to myself, and then I use that amazing power of wisdom to begin to paint something else. I affirm to myself that I am the creative power in my world. I get to choose what thoughts I think. I get to choose what beliefs I harbor. I get to choose my state of being, and I tune into a new potential. Let's say it's a new action, right? Like, I'm in the gym consistently. You affirm that to yourself. You start to practice that. So that's just an idea for anyone who might be struggling with negativity, is don't suppress the negative, right? Give love to yourself, accept where you are, and then run towards the positive. Then attract the positive, then embrace the positive. It's just a really powerful idea.
Yeah, and if I can touch on, you mentioned failure initially there. There's a quote, and I don't remember who I heard it from. It's a more modern quote, where those with wisdom view failure as an opportunity, whereas those lacking wisdom view failure as a threat. And that's something that I think we really need to keep in perspective, especially it seems counterintuitive if you're experiencing anxiety or depression and then you fail. You think in that negative headspace is just going to be, it's like the straw that breaks the camel's back, right? You're like, oh, I'm in this negative place, and why would I want to go fail? That's just going to make me feel even worse. But it's like that opportunity, viewing it as an opportunity to grow and to learn from yourself, because you're not going to go throughout life and never fail. So why would you try and avoid those failures? Why wouldn't you embrace them head on? And I think that's inherent in your message of like running towards the positive, right? Is we face the choice within failure to either view it as a negative and say, well, this is a reflection of me, I suck, or view it as a positive and say, this is necessary. What can I learn from this? And that's embracing the positive in that sense. So just kind of relating it to that wisdom aspect, that quote was immediately what I thought of within your metaphor, is that you view everything as an opportunity, right? And even if there are negative emotions that come with it, you have to acknowledge them, but then find the positive as well.
And that's what it is. It's about changing that perspective again, because, there's another beautiful quote, where attention goes, energy flows. And so if all of your attention is just on what's negative and you're beating yourself up about what went wrong, the mistakes that you were making, the failure that happened, you want to shift your attention to the solution, right? Tony Robbins has a beautiful quote too. He says, acknowledge your problems, acknowledge that they're there, but then give all of your time and energy towards solutions. Use your challenges as a catalyst towards a new potential. Right? So if you notice yourself in negative thinking patterns, again, you can't say, don't think that, don't think that, don't think that. Because again, the first thing that starts happening is like, don't think of a car. First thing on your mind is a car, right? It's you're fueling all your awareness there. And so you need to be able to shift your perspective. And that comes with exactly what you said, which is shifting your perspective, seeing your failure as an opportunity and not as a limitation, seeing your challenges as something exciting, not something to run away from, is very, very powerful and a very Stoic idea in and of itself.
And you're a man of analogies, clearly, and I love all the analogies that you use. So I've got one from the movie Incredibles, and it's it's a great movie where the villain, the main villain, he says, "If everyone is super, then no one will be." And it's sort of the idea, if life was smooth all the time, then it would never be smooth. If everything was great all the time, then nothing would ever be great. And so whenever you're in the midst of a very difficult time or a very hard failure, or where, like we have all been, rock bottom, where we feel like almost nothing could get worse, that is exactly why we are able to experience the highs, is because we are also experiencing the equal lows. And there's a term, I do not remember what it's called, but if you can imagine sort of in science class when you learn about the amplitude of a wave, right? You just see like this median line, and then you see the equal, the crests and the lows, right? That's sort of how life is. It's for every equal high, you have an equal low. And I don't necessarily know if that is a Stoic teaching within itself, but I know that one thing that is a Stoic teaching is what we like to call capital N nature, nature with a capital N. And this is what the Stoics discuss a lot. And it can be referred, they say the gods, they say, province, they say many different terms sort of to discuss what I guess they would call fate almost. What is the controlling the higher power? And the interesting thing about this higher power is that everything all the time is where it needs to be. Everything that is happening to you is happening at the perfect time that it's supposed to. And so fighting against, the rhythm of life is pointless, because if you're at the highest of your highs, that means that at some point you have been or you will be at as an equal of a low. It's just a simple perspective change. It's a simple mindset shift from viewing it as an obstacle versus viewing it as an obstacle that you can step on to then move forward and move
Yeah,
over.
one of my favorite teachings is that true unconditional happiness is saying yes to everything, and that's something I try to touch on too. Is just one of the things that I portray in my teachings is this idea that joy is your natural state, and then people say, "Well, then am I never supposed to feel sad? Am I never supposed to feel low?" And what I kind of describe is that, on the surface level of things, we have these polar opposites, right? I feel sad, something didn't go my way. Then I feel happy, something goes my way. I feel a little down, I feel a little up. And that's like this, right? But there's a kind of deeper state available to us where we come to say yes to every circumstance and situation in our life, where we greet it openly. And that leads to what I kind of call unconditional joy. And so, what the difference between that is, we can say that happiness is high, it's kind of like a peak, but joy is deep. It's a kind of deep undercurrent. And I don't know if you guys have ever had this experience, but I certainly have, where there's actually been times in my life where I was so deeply sad about something that there was actually a hint of joy. There was actually a little hint of like, wow, I get to experience even this sadness, which can feel painful, but what a beautiful experience. Sometimes the most beautiful songs are sad songs, right? And so I'm not telling people to dwell in negativity, but by saying yes to everything that comes into your life, by framing things in a positive perspective, you start to access this deep state of joy, which doesn't leave you. So that even as you're going through challenges, even as you're feeling a little bit down, there's a kind of unconditional reverence for being alive through all of the different highs and lows of your life. And I will say one other thing, Mateo, about that idea of the highs and lows is I heard one teacher kind of describe it that it's not just up and down experiencing the same degrees of highs and the same degrees of lows. It's kind of like stairs where you're going up and then down and up and then down, but every up is a little bit higher. And there's this kind of exponential growth that takes place. So, yes, you'll experience these peaks and valleys in your life, but that as you grow and as you develop wisdom and as you come to know yourself better, that you will every high will be a little bit higher than the last high, and every low will still be a little higher still. But it doesn't mean you're not going to experience challenges. It's just going to continuously evolve in a positive way. So you're not kind of stuck in this endless loop, but you're kind of still progressing even as you go through challenges.
We like to look at life sort of as a stock market chart, where it's like you could be all the way up here and then tomorrow you're like all the way back down, but at the end of the day, you still get all the way up. And I think, your analogy of the stairs was a great way to put that. I think the use of the rhythmic, the crests and the lows it's more to say, there is balance. There's an equilibrium in life, and there's everything is a perfect balance, whether you believe it was created by God or whatnot, or nature or the universe and whatnot, but everything is in rhythm with itself at all times.
Yeah, and I was actually going to ask you guys that. I know you guys talk a lot about Stoicism, and I know quite a bit about Stoicism. I told you I studied it quite a lot. Do you guys have any spiritual ideas? I know, Mateo, you said that you kind of looked into Taoism and Buddhism a little bit. Do you guys have any spiritual perspectives that you see relating to Stoicism, or did the Stoics hold spiritual ideas about the nature of reality in the universe?
Ren, I'll let you answer first.
So it's actually funny you mentioned Buddhism, because a lot of the teachings in Stoicism directly mirror Buddhism. A lot of the ancient Stoics actually went to India to study Buddhism. So
Wow, I didn't know that.
yeah, so
Amazing.
a lot of like the spiritual ideas, in the sense of like we mentioned capital and nature, and then I guess maybe deviating a little bit from like the ethics, that kind of stuff, I think is all really derived from Buddhism, and then by extension I think Confucianism and a couple of other different more Eastern philosophies. So that's one thing. I really like reading Buddhism because of how closely it relates to Stoicism, and I think there's actually aspects of Buddhism where they take Stoicism to a different degree that is actually better. And then in Stoicism, they take a Buddhist concept that's to a degree that's better. So it's kind of like, you can't. I know we market ourselves as a Stoic podcast, but that's the value of checking out all these different schools of philosophy. Is like you said, there's a golden thread throughout all of them. But then, especially with Stoicism, Buddhism is very influential. They got a lot of ideas from them, and so when you look at and compare the teachings, you're like, wow, these are pretty similar. What happened here? And it's because they just had so much direct influence.
And that's the amazing thing is about building off a Ren between Stoicism and Buddhism is despite being taught in very different geographic regions and as well as different time periods, they are almost perfectly mirrored more than any other, two philosophies that you will find. And spirituality wise, so the book Meditations is not a book on simply sitting down, legs crossed, Om symbol, closing your eyes, right? It's reflection. So what the Stoics said simply about, being spiritual is being in a very reflective state as well. And so the best way to be a spiritual person is to better understand yourself. And I think what Marcus Aurelius was trying to do with meditations was kind of give a guide to here. I sat down and over time I have all these works. These are all my reflections. And the reason that Stoics were so in touch with who they were is simply through the art of reflection. Now I think, and then when you bring Buddhism into it, which is very interesting, it's a lot more spiritual, right? And all these spiritual concepts certainly could be paralleled with aspects of Stoicism, but in terms of spirituality, yes, Buddhism definitely would touch more on the spiritual, the nature, more like universal kind of energy type side, where Stoicism is more, I guess, just rationality and logic. But yet both of them you can find and then bring together. But we have an episode also, interestingly enough, on spirituality and religion and how those sort of go hand in hand as well, and how they combat each other. But within, like you said, the golden thread that weaves all of these concepts and these different ideologies and religions and philosophies together, spirituality does exist within the Stoic works as a whole, yes.
Yeah, I was so curious to hear that. And I love what you said about meditation. That what the Stoics were able to kind of learn from the Buddhists is that meditation is not just a seated practice, it's actually more of the state of being meditative, right? So there's meditation as the practice. I actually have a Buddha sitting in front of me here, and he's very peaceful. Every time I look at him, he's always very peaceful. And he's in the meditative posture, he's in the lotus position, meditating. And that's a practice that I implement twice a day, and I recommend other people implement if they are struggling with their mental health or if they just are looking for better peace of mind. But one of the main things that I've taken from my experience with meditation as a practice is that it has allowed me to become meditative. So that even as I'm going about my day, even when I'm talking with you guys or talking with a friend or going to get groceries or going to get food, I'm much more present throughout my day. I'm in that state of self-reflection. My thoughts are not going 10 different ways at once. They're very focused and aligned, and my mind is calm and creative. And that's one of the main things too. There's a chapter in my book that I talk about the true nature of meditation, not what you think, where I kind of talk on exactly that. It's not just a seated practice. That what I even call meditation is it's just the act of being aware of your inner world. So in the same way that right now I'm aware of this pen, I have a notepad in front of me, my water bottle, you guys, that's the external world. Being aware of your inner world is kind of recognizing, what thoughts am I thinking? What feelings am I feeling? Right? And by becoming aware of that through the power of awareness, we're able to change them, because you're not able to change something that you're not aware of, right? Because a lot of people, they don't even know, like you ask them, how are you feeling? And they're like, I don't know, right? And really they could be in a state of inner turmoil, but they just haven't paid attention to it enough, right? And so that's a very, very powerful idea. And I'd say that the easiest way to get into the meditative state for people who are interested, and the Stoics talk about this too, is disidentifying with negative thinking and disidentifying with your thoughts in general. To recognize that your thoughts are an aspect of you, they're an expression of you, but they're not you in your entirety. Just as a painter is separate from the painting. A painter has control over how they paint the painting, but that's the creator versus the created, which is the art, right? In the same way, you can look at one thought and just observe it neutrally and not identify with it. Let's say it's a thought that says, I'm insecure. You can just look at that neutrally and say, oh, there's one thought. Is there a thought that I'd like to feed more of my energy to, right? This is that idea of, again, becoming the creator of your inner environment, becoming the master of self is choosing what you create in there, right? So looking at one thought that's negative and just observing it neutrally, not saying it's good or bad. It's just, there it is. I'm seeing it. And I'd like to choose this thought and think this thought and give my time and my energy to this new thought.
Yeah, the way that I like to put it, Matteo and I are both big into meditation. I think we've experienced it at different levels. We've tried different strategies, and it's something, the way I like to put it is centered. I always feel more centered because when some event happens to me, I can identify that I've been knocked off center, right? Centered is my balanced state where, like you said, I feel neutral. The events happen to me and I can view them in a as neutral as possible, humanly possible way. And so I can identify everything around me. And I can also identify those things in myself because I, again, am knocked off balance. So when I wake up in the morning, I meditate, I feel centered. Somebody cuts me off in traffic. I'm like, it's like anger, return to center.
Yeah.
That's what meditation has been for me. And it's something that I think has been really lost, I think, in our generation, because meditation is the practice of silencing your mind and really doing nothing, just being calm. And that's not what the world stresses now. The world stresses like pay attention to these 7 things, never have free time, never always have your mind preoccupied by something. So I think meditation is only becoming more valuable in today's age because of that, because it gives you the tools to say, I don't need to be preoccupied by 7 different things. I can take 30 minutes in the morning, just be calm and to be clear,
Yes.
which is a skill that is very valuable.
One of the most beautiful things about meditation that it did for me is it allowed me to see what we were talking about earlier and what the Stoics talk about too, which is your natural state is happiness, which is if you can sit quietly by yourself in a room and you're not talking, you're not thinking, you're just kind of watching thoughts go by, but you're not actually thinking the thoughts, you're just letting them kind of pass through. You're not tasting anything, smelling anything, moving anything. You're just sitting still, and that you find that in that state, you actually start to feel quite peaceful and quite happy. If you can be happy with literally nothing, you're not even looking at anything. Imagine how much more rich the little things in life are going to be. Sipping coffee, getting a meal with some friends, having a nice conversation, right? Again, we talk about this idea that people are seeking happiness in the external world. The most powerful part of meditation is you find that in doing absolutely nothing, you're at peace. You're happy. And that doesn't mean that you have to sit in a cave and meditate all day to stay there. What it teaches you is that you can do anything and express that happiness in anything that you do instead of looking to take it. So that, when I'm writing, I'm not trying to get happiness from writing. I'm expressing the happiness that I am in my writing. When I'm conversing with someone, I'm not looking to get happiness. I'm expressing the happiness that I am. That's one of the most beautiful things about meditation that I've kind of come across. And again, it goes back to that idea, which is we live in a paradigm where people think that they need to be thinking of 20 different things at once in order for their life to flow. That if I am not constantly thinking of who I got to meet later, what I got to do, my tasks and all these other things, that I'm going to somehow, my life is going to fall apart. And what you actually find is the opposite. And what I say is that the unattended mind creates far more problems than it solves. It will solve one problem through its overthinking and then create 10 that don't even exist. And when you learn to quiet the mind, your problems actually start to dissolve instead of resolve. Before you were running around trying to solve all these imaginary issues, and what happens is, again, you quiet down, you realize there were never even problems to begin with. So then if a real problem appears in your life, now there's just one real problem to deal with, and you're very centered and focused and able to handle it.
I like the going back just to your first point about how it's a state. It's not It's not a practice. And yes, meditation is a practice, but being in a meditative state, like you said, is, and that's the best way to put it, because there are many things you can do that puts you in a meditative state. You could even argue that going into the gym puts you in a meditative state because it clears your thoughts and it allows you to be present. You could very well make that argument. And so that's a very good distinction, Ryan, for you to make, is that anything can work as meditation for you as long as it allows you to be reflective, to be in the present, and to sort of clear your mind. I also really like the point that you made about your thoughts don't define you. They are simply just a part of you. And when you meditate, I imagine you sitting here and the thoughts are the clouds, right? They're floating by and you can see each cloud floating by, but then you let it go. You don't try to catch it and pull it out of the sky. You simply just let it keep going. And then to your point about, worrying and trying to balance all these things. I mean, the only problems that we create are often in our own mind. And that's just a very basic Stoic principle, is that we suffer more in imagination than we do in reality. And therefore, I have people tell me all the time, like, aren't you anxious about school? Aren't you worried? And I'm like, no, because it's in my control to get the schoolwork done. I mean, I'm in control, therefore I'm not anxious. I mean, is it more than I would like? Sure, but am I in control to get it done? Absolutely. And if there's really one last thing I guess I could say about that, is that if you're in control, there is no reason to stress. And if you are not in control, there is even less of a reason to be stressed about it, because you are not in control. And that goes back to Ren's point about the dichotomy of control as a whole Stoic principle. But it's a very basic concept. And people are like, oh, well, I guess it's not that simple. It is that simple. It's not that easy, but it is that simple. And like you're saying, all of these teachings that we speak, they're very easy. They're they're not very easy. They're very simple ways of living. They're very simple concepts, very simple principles that almost make you sound very cliche at times. You're like, oh, if you don't want to be stressed, just let go of the things that stress you. And it's like, well, obviously, but it's a very hard thing to do when you really sit down and get uncomfortable and, come to terms with those things. So my last, I guess, piece of advice, and just building off of what you said, it is simple, but it is not easy. But you first must be very, very self-aware to understand what these stressors are, the things that you can't control. And in order ultimately to identify your purpose, you have to have such a good idea of who you are, what matters to you, and where your shortcomings are in order to develop your purpose.
I don't think I don't have much to add to that. We've been rolling for like 2 hours here, pretty steady, and that's just amazing. And I don't have much else to say to that. I think you really summed it up there, which is especially with that last point. If it's not in your control, don't worry. If it is in your control, don't worry. And I love what you said there too, which is it's simple. It doesn't mean it's easy, but it is simple. And I think that's what people fear the most, is they fear that complexity. They think, I could never learn how to implement stoicism into my life. I could never learn to be a master of myself. I could. And it's like, no, you really can. You just have to start. And that's the hardest thing for people. But hopefully this is some motivation for the listeners, which is, if you just start, or if you're already on your journey, just keep going. It's one of my other favorite mantras. Just keep going, because you're going to see it pay off. And again, it's not always going to be easy, but that can sometimes be the most exciting part, because that's when you learn the most. So I think you summed it up beautifully there, Matteo.
Yeah, so I mean, you said it best. We've been rolling for 2 hours. It doesn't even feel like 2 hours. It feels like 30 minutes. We learned so much. But Ryan, if I had one final question for you, it's what's next? You've written a book. You're setting up the website. So what's next? What do we get to see from Ryan Quirk next?
Well, I think it's the same intention by which I started my book is the same intention I'm carrying with me, which is when I first wrote the book, I said to myself, if this even changes one person's life, if this helps one person, my work is done. Now, not that I don't want it to help many more, but that is like my main goal, which is I'm not doing this for fame or notoriety or anything. It's purely to help other people, just as you guys are doing with this podcast. And it's because we're passionate about it, because we love it, right? And so that intention is still the same. With what's next is a lot of learning to do. We talk about this idea of learning is I'm learning what it means to now post content myself on my socials, which are also on my website, to spread the book and spread the word. I'm going to be giving a talk April 27th at the Institute of World Culture in Santa Barbara. So I don't know if there's anyone in the Santa Barbara area, but any locals are welcome to go to that. And then hopefully more and more, it'll express through many different means, right? It'll be through coaching, through speaking, through more books in the works. I have 2 more books in the works actually now. And then eventually, I guess, if you ask long-term goal, help reform the psychology system and school education system as well, kind of these social structures. So lots of long-term goals and lots of many different ways that it's manifesting, but the same core intention. How can I uplift other people in a state of joy? Same intention, many different ways it's going to unfold.
Well, man, I have no doubt that, your future is bright, and we look forward to working with you in the future as well, whether it's having you back on the podcast or if you start something, us going onto your platform and speaking, but having you and having you share your insight and your experience and your journey, and ultimately just all the thoughts that we all have in our heads that we just want to tell everybody, that we want to share. This is the perfect place to do it. And it's really been, our pleasure having you. If anything, it's really our honor to have you on our podcast and speaking about these things, without worry, of anything at all. Just speaking our minds and just having a fantastic conversation. Like Ren said, as man teaches, he learns, and we have been, teaching each other a lot and learning a lot from each other. And so, my personal remark, it's been a pleasure for me, and I've really enjoyed having you on today. Like you said, 2 hours felt more like 15 minutes. We could talk for another 5, 6, and, just keep going and going. But for the sake of, our days, it's probably better that we cut it here and then do something else again in the future. But it was really great having you on.
Man, I'm a fan of the podcast and the work that you guys are doing. I've already spread it with a bunch of people. I plan on spreading it with more people. And so thank you guys. We need more young people. And for anyone listening too, we need more young people getting involved in this type of work, looking to uplift other people, looking to become masters of themselves, looking to ultimately live an extraordinary life, right? Because that's the birthright of every human being, is live an extraordinary, adventurous, loving, joyful, creative, and confident life. And so thank you guys, because you guys are helping with just that. And I'd love to work together in the future.
Just to echo what Matteo said, it's truly inspiring, and we've been very grateful to have you on. And I think that all our listeners can really gather something from this episode, something from your website. And with that being said, give you a little bit of promotion. rqselfmastery.com. If you'd like to check out more of Ryan's work, his book, 18-Year-Old's Guide to Self-Mastery, is also available on Amazon. So be sure to check that out for, more of his work. And with that being said, this has been this week's episode of the Gen Z Stoic Podcast. Thank you if you've made it through the full 2 hours so far, and we will see you again next week.